I'm Lior Phillips, host of This Must Be the Gig. We're a weekly podcast that documents everything about the world of live music, speaking with choreographers, costume and set designers, the people who run beloved venues and festivals, and, of course, speaking with musicians about that one gig that changed their lives. Get your peek behind the curtain at consequenceofsound.net, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Consequence Podcast Network.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you want to make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of
Greetings, constant listeners, and welcome yet again to the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast. My name is Randall Colburn, and today we've gathered to discuss 1995's Rose Matter, a book I was somewhat shocked to learn is considered by some to be King's dirt worst novel. Before we get started, I'd like to thank you all for being constant listeners and urge you, if you haven't done so yet, to please leave us a nice review on iTunes or wherever it is you consume your podcast. We will not accept bad reviews. We reject them. We only take good ones. So I'd also like to share a bit of news we announced earlier this week as part of the virtual presentation of the 2020 Salem Horror Fest. The Losers Club is actually going to be hosting a reunion with the Baby Losers from 1990's It miniseries. Very excited about that. We announced that in our socials on Monday, and it's happening in the first week of October. We're going to, I'm not sure on the exact date yet. I think they're still finalizing that, but we'll share stories, we'll talk King, all kinds of fun stuff. So that's going to be fun. We'll have more information on our socials. Follow us on those. And before we get started, I'd also like to announce a new segment we're introducing in the month of October. We're calling it The Danse Macabre, and in it we'll be reading and discussing some of the books that King touts as sort of the fundamental texts of horror in his nonfiction book, Danse Macabre, which we have a very good episode on from several years ago. We'll be kicking things off with Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Maybe you've heard of it, on October 9th, and we'd love for you to read along with us. It's short, so that helps. And before that, we've got some good Patreon content, including all lobstrosities on some terrible movie that our Patreon patrons are going to be voting on. I'm hoping for Lawnmower Man 2 Job's War. We'll see, but it's up to you guys, so make that vote. And we're also going to be doing a sweet treat in which a handful of us are going to talk about our childhood Halloween costumes, all of which are some shade of embarrassing. I very much look forward to that one. So all that said, allow me to introduce my fellow losers. Who is joining me here from the fine city of Chicago?
This is McKenzie, the rap DJ for the kiddies, Gerber, coming at you from the 9th annual Daughters and Sisters Swing into Summer Picnic and Concert. You can find me here and on Halloweenies. My first experience with Rose Matter was about a month and a half ago, where I started reading it.
This is a brand new book for you?
Yeah, it's a brand new book. I didn't know anything about this book at all. I just remember the cover of the book being, widely seen in my youth. Yeah. Because, this and Gerald's Game and all these things that came out in the 90s, I just ran into all the time, and I was always really interested in, what's that? And I never looked up what it was about or anything. So I'm coming at this extremely, extremely fresh.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Like, we were sort of the prime age for wandering around Target or whatever, and there would be 8,000 copies of whatever King book came out. And so before I ever read them, I remember seeing Rose Matter like everywhere. But then anyways, I'll get to that in a minute. And who is joining me from Nashville?
This is Jenn Adams. I think this is my third reread of this book. I must have read it in high school, but I don't remember anything about that reading. And then I read it again about 4 years ago, I think, and it has been like really influential in my life. I emailed you and I said, if there's one book in all of King's canon that I want to talk about, it's this one.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of complicated feelings about it, but like it has been like a key book in my life. So, and then I reread it this time. So
nice.
third time's the charm. Yeah. So
I was
I'm
very
excited
glad
to
when
talk
you
about it.
when you emailed me, because this is one of those where I'm worried, like, oh God, nobody's going to want to do this.
Yeah, no, man, I could probably talk about that. I've marked so many quotes in this, so
That's great.
I
Yeah,
could
I'm
go for
really
a long
looking
time
forward
on this one.
to diving in. And then who is returning to the podcast after discussing Dolores Claiborne with us a few episodes back?
This is Ana
Nice.
Marie Cox.
Nice.
And this is my first time with Rose Matter. I feel like I'm such a King completist. I've read so much. This one, I guess, must have blanked it like from my mind. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about it for sure.
Yeah.
I am just. It's one of those books that's such a strange read. Like, I did want to talk to people about it immediately because like I think everyone's probably going to bounce off of different things from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I first encountered this. I read this when I was young. And it's funny. It's like, and I had this experience with Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne as well, because I read all of them when I was, 13, 14 years old, and a lot of this stuff was just really foreign to me. I mean, this was not stuff that I ever encountered in stuff that I read. A lot of the issues of domestic abuse, and especially in Rose Matter, I mean, the concept of losing a pregnancy. I mean, obviously I knew that was a thing that happened, but I'd never encountered it like I did in this book, and it was really, really disturbing for me as a child. But in that weird way, I was sort of fascinated because I felt like I was encountering adult things, and things that perhaps, at least that my parents did not think I was ready for yet. So it was, so I remember it very vividly. I actually feel like I remembered more about this book than I did of, say, probably Dolores Claiborne or Gerald's Game. This book sort of seared its way into my memory a little bit. So, but I haven't read it since then. This is not one I revisit often. So yeah, so I was really, I feel like I've said way early in the podcast, like I'm excited to get to books like Rose Matter and, and Insomnia, these texts that aren't discussed as much because for one, they don't have, like movie adaptations, which I think sort of prolongs the life of a lot of King books, but then others that, other books that just maybe just aren't part of that. Nobody associates those books with King in the way they do with like The Shining or, Carrie and things of that nature. So yeah, this was one that I was looking forward to. And before we hop in, I would love to know what edition we all read. I'm always very boring because I read everything on my Kindle now. So I just read my Kindle edition, but did any of you guys read any hardcover paperback editions?
I read the Signet.
Go ahead. Someone else.
I read the Signet
everyone
book.
at the same time.
I know, yeah. I listened to the audiobook though. I really enjoyed this audiobook a lot. But I referenced it with the Signet paperback.
Nice. How about you, Ana?
I have the first edition hardcover,
Nice.
which was remarkably easy to get.
Yeah. I don't know if this one's too much in demand. How about you,
Maybe
Mac?
for you. I had to search for this one. No, I have the same. It's the Viking. The ripping of the paper, the opening of the mystical painting.
Yeah, I feel like that's the one I read too, because this was never a book I owned. I owned a lot of King. I usually had, I think like Penguin House paperbacks when I was young, but this was one I never owned. This was one I got from the library, and so I remember I read the first edition then too, although it was very dog-eared because, obviously it was from the library. But speaking of that Viking edition, it came out in June 1995, and according to King, he wrote it between June 10th, 1993, and November 17th, 1994, which is a pretty, I think for King, like he obviously writes fast because he releases a million books a year, but based on at least some of the other books we read recently, I feel like that's a fairly condensed timeline, and then obviously it was turned around pretty quickly. I think he was sort of on a roll writing these days, even though, and we'll talk more about his own thoughts on these books, that that he wasn't particularly pleased with this era of his writing. But, obviously this book was a #1 bestseller. I think all of his books, especially in this period, were selling like crazy. So even though this book was not critically acclaimed, it had some good reviews, but there were some that were incredibly harsh. I was very surprised to see Entertainment Weekly, who has always been very King friendly, he even went to work for them for a while, they really went down on this one, and they called it so earnest and unshaded that at times the book, King's 35th, seems an act of atonement for the dark, sinister pleasures his earlier work had to offer. And a lot of their issues, especially in these reviews that I read, had to do with Norman, and we'll talk about a plot synopsis shortly, but sort of the villain of this book. A lot of people basically say this dude is so evil that it is hard. It's almost comical to the point where it sort of can pull you out of it a little bit. Yeah, so like this quote from Entertainment Weekly, basically, and this actually I think is quite true. King can't have any fun with Norman, so he's presented as a murderous hate machine, as devoid of subtlety as an onrushing truck. And they also describe sort of the fantasy world that we encounter in this as a fairy tale-ish conceit that's about as convincing as a CD-ROM game.
I love that reference. I actually, that like stuck with me like after I read that, because it's such a perfect, like they didn't mean it to be like a polished, stuck in amber 1995 reference, but
right.
It's so perfect.
Yeah, and I'm looking
totally would have played that game.
I'm looking up when Myst was released. Myst was released in 1993, so I think that's probably what they're referencing, because that was like the most popular game in the world, and it takes place in sort of a light fantasy world, which makes me laugh. So, yeah, and then Philadelphia Inquirer called it overwritten and predictable, but they also called it heartfelt and exciting, and ultimately deemed it a quote-unquote good king, which I thought, we see that so much in the reviews of that time, is there's like good king and bad king, which I think we can agree with, but on this pod we're a little more nuanced with that. But in the Sacramento Bee, they said that Norman was too monstrous to be credible, but they said the book built to a vivid climax. And this I thought was actually quite shocking. In 2014, Vulture did a ranking of all of King's novels that had been released until that time, and Rose Madder was the dead last, which to me, I think is, we'll talk more about it later, but I was a bit surprised by that. But they said, their very short blurb, they basically say, in the early 90s, King wrote a set of novels focused on abused women and the horrible men who beat and haunt and entrap them. This one was the last and least of the bunch. The combination of the real, and then in parentheses, the title character, the battered woman shelter she ends up with, her monster of a husband, with the supernatural, magical painting that offers a gateway to a Greek myth-tinged world, feels less convincing here than it does in any other of King's books. So yeah, pretty harsh reputation for this one, but it's also one that King is sort of, encouraged. I remember I was reading Grady Hendrix's great Stephen King reread on Tor.com, which has been a great source and when we're revisiting these books, and he calls it the book that Stephen King can't stop throwing under the bus. But famously, we talked about this in our Insomnia episode, but Rose Madder was described by King in On Writing as a stiff, trying too hard novel, which is also how he described Insomnia. And he talks about this in this Paris Review quote I'm about to read, but we also talked about it on Insomnia because he spoke of it in very similar ways, which is essentially that he's very big on allowing the story to guide you rather than you guiding the story, and he feels like Insomnia and Rose Madder are books where he had too firm of an idea of what the story was and didn't allow it to sort of flourish in its way. But here's a quote from the Paris Review where he speaks broadly about Rose Madder and this era of his writing. He says, "Every book is different each time you revise it, because when you finish the book, you say to yourself, this isn't what I meant to write at all. At some point, when you're actually writing the book, you realize that. But if you try to steer it, you're like a pitcher trying to steer a fastball, and you screw everything up. As the science fiction writer Alfred Bester used to say, the book is the boss. You've got to let the book go where it wants to go, and you just follow along. If it doesn't do that, it's a bad book, and I've had bad books. I think Rose Madder fits in that category, because it never really took off. I felt like I had to force that one." And in another interview with the author John Callahan, he said, sometimes I feel like a baseball player, and that some books feel like singles, some books feel like doubles, and every so often you get a rose matter, which I don't think he's describing as a home run. Definitely a book that King does not look too fondly on, but, he felt similarly to Insomnia, and I'll say that that was a book, I think that overall we found a lot of things to like about that book, and, in Grady Hendrix's article, he kind of said that he defended the book and basically said it's not nearly as bad as Stephen King seems to think it is. But we'll talk more about that. But before we do, I thought this was interesting because I was like, has there been any film adaptation? Obviously there hasn't been, but I'm like, was this ever optioned or pursued as a feature film project? And actually it has been twice. Back in, not when it first came out, or at least if it did back when it first came out, it wasn't in anything that I could find. But in 2011, the book was apparently adapted by Naomi Sheridan, who's the daughter of director Jim Sheridan, who made In America, which is an excellent movie from the mid-2000s. And yeah, it was going to be her first feature project. She had made some short films. It was supposed to shoot in 2012. Palomar Pictures was producing, but just never materialized. And I had trouble finding any reason as to why, but it just seems to have fallen apart. And then actually a couple years ago, a producer, Asaf Bernstein, he directed the Israeli TV drama Fauda, which King was a big fan of. He had signed on to direct an adaptation of Rose Madder, and it had a lot of producers behind it. And I was trying to find some sort of like update on that, but I couldn't find it. But Bernstein said at the time, Stephen King's literary universe has greatly influenced me as a writer and filmmaker, and Rose Madder is a terrifying and exhilarating thriller that will make for a compelling parable of the battle between the sexes. Rose and Norman undergo a fascinating transformation, sometimes horrifying, at other times touching, and occasionally both at the same time. Rose is a once-in-a-lifetime role for an actress. And so that still could happen. I mean, that's a couple years is not that long in Hollywood time, so definitely something to keep an eye out for. But yeah, I know that when we were putting together kind of our list of all the things that are currently in development, we left that one off because there hadn't been any news about it in so long. But you never know when these things could resurface. So before we get into the hook, I want to just, I'm going to read a synopsis that I got off Amazon, but if you guys have any in your editions that you think are fun or shine a light on anything that's not in this synopsis, then please feel free to read. But I'm going to jump forward and read this synopsis. After surviving 14 years of hell in a violently abusive marriage, Rosie Daniels finally summons the courage to flee for her life. But leaving her husband Norman for a new city and a new start is a very daunting prospect. It's hard for Rosie not to keep looking over her shoulder, and with good reason. Norman's a police officer with the instincts of a predator, a force of relentless terror and savagery, a man almost mythic in his monstrosity. He's very good at finding people, even if he is losing his mind. Rosie's only hope for salvation may lie in a far more dangerous place, where she must become her own myth, and the woman she never knew she could be. So, how does that stack up to your guys' synopses?
Yeah, it's about the same as they pulled a lot of that from the original synopsis.
Yeah. Every now and then you get some real
small.
kooky ones.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it doesn't quite capture it somehow. Like, it's weird because it is a very straight description, but I read that and still was, taken aback by the book I actually read. I also think it's funny that they say mythic in his monstrosity and enter her own myth, because I was like, all right, that'll be interesting. And then, you know what, it's actual Greek myth, like,
yeah.
Yeah,
they're being real literal.
Yeah, sometimes like incredibly so, but I almost appreciate the boldness, which we'll get to. But yeah, let's hop and talk about the hook a little bit.
Yes. Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
The hook is where we talk about sort of, what is the central driving force of the book? What is the central horror of the book? And there's a few different things I think we can discuss here, but I think primarily, especially since this wraps up this sort of trilogy of books, although you can kind of throw Insomnia in there because he explores a lot about domestic abuse in that book as well. But I think, obviously, this book opens with a very violent scene of abuse and the main character, Rosie, having a miscarriage. And it's described in very explicit terms. And so I think sort of because he sort of explored with Dolores Claiborne and in Gerald's Game, he explored abuse as it manifested in several different ways. Obviously, Dolores Claiborne's husband was physically abusive, but he was also financially abusive and emotionally abusive in a lot of ways. And in Gerald's Game, it was more of a deeply unhappy marriage where there was a lot of emotional abuse and mental abuse going on. But here, basically, the husband is elevated to the role of, genuine monster. And I think that was a very, that was the big criticism of the book from critics, but I think that was a very intentional choice on King's part. Was he wanted Norman to be, completely, what's the word I'm looking for? Unsympathetic, completely monstrous, and, basically a rampaging force to be run away from. And so it's very blunt force in that sense. But I thought this quote here, I think, sums up the state that Rosie exists in at the beginning of the book. It says, Norman had been working on her kidneys for 14 years, and the traces of blood she saw more and more frequently in her urine no longer surprised or worried her. It was just another unpleasant part of being married. That was all. And there were probably millions of women who had it worse. Thousands right in this town. So she had always seen it anyway, until now. And I think that sums up sort of the state that she's in as we begin the book. So I guess maybe a good place to begin is the beginning, since the opening is so visceral. Did you guys have any sort of off-the-cuff thoughts about that? What was it like to enter this world and be confronted with that?
I'll just say this was an interesting book to read, kind of after having discussed Dolores Claiborne with y'all. I mean, I'm glad I guess I'm at least 2/3 in this series. It has some of the same problems, I think, that we discussed with Dolores Claiborne. And the one that I feel sort of the most strongly about is I don't believe King quite is able to convey the very difficult to convey. I in a way can't fault him for it, but the reasons why women stay with their abusers. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't mind that he cheated a little bit by fast forwarding 10 years. Yeah. Because I feel like I don't think he would have been able to convey a real feeling relationship for 10 years with that heavy abuse, because the thing about Norman that is he is, a almost comically evil person, right? Yeah. And that would be someone that's very hard to stay with, he doesn't allow Norman any kind of, I don't even mean redeeming. Not redeeming at all, but charm.
Right.
Usually those, there's something there. There's something that beguiles the survivor.
Yeah. There's a lot of time spent in Dolores Claiborne, of their early courtship and the moments of sweetness that, her husband showed, at least early in their marriage, and even the tiny moments of sweetness that kind of persevere over time. Here we get none of that. So.
Yeah, she literally says she can't remember a time when he was nice to, when Bill Steiner, who, by the way, I do think is a charming character. I like him, and I don't know how many May December romances. I guess they're not that far apart, but as a woman married to a guy that's a little younger than she is, I really appreciated it. And I thought that he was a delightful character. I genuinely liked Bill Steiner. Yeah. But, when she's their romance kicks off, she's like, oh, this is so wonderful. And she tries to remember anything like that with Norman, and she can't.
Yeah. I can't remember when did they get together?
When she was 18.
How old was she when she married? Okay, when she was 18, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see it going that way. And then also, Yeah, he does absolutely jump past all of it. I mean, Norman's already at like 100%, when this thing starts. It doesn't really have anywhere to go but up and just nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is a really hard thing to capture. The thing that I think that's baffling to me, though, is that that point when she says that she doesn't remember like one time where there was something there, because then it's, I don't know. Yeah. It's almost like King thinking out loud, like, I don't know why you were with him for 15 years. I'm not going to write that. We're going to start here.
What were you going to say, Jen?
I was going to say, I think I agree with you. I don't know if he quite captures why she stayed, but I do think he captures why she's afraid to leave. And I think those are kind of two different kind of things. And it reminds me a lot of The Invisible Man, where what I think the story is really about is what it is like to leave that relationship rather than what the actual relationship is. I don't know. I pulled a lot of stuff from this because my first marriage was a lot like this one. Not nearly as extreme, but there was so much that I kept thinking, oh my gosh, that's how I felt. Oh yeah, that's right. So there was a lot that I connected to. But yeah, it is so like brutal and extreme that it's almost like the level of control seems out of proportion. Although if that were really the case, I could imagine just being terrified to leave, and just at a certain point, like, you just stop even thinking about whether you're happy or not. It's just, this is what your life is,
I feel like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I almost want to take back a little bit of what I said, because I do think that whole afraid to leave piece is really well conveyed in what it feels like to leave. Like, the most compelling part of the book to me was actually her departure from that house.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
I loved that. I think that was some great writing. I think he really, like, I also was in an abusive relationship, emotionally abusive relationship at one point in my life. And that I recognized a lot, I will say, as well. And
yeah, I had, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, like, I think that his focus on that, I'm almost ready to forgive him for, like, not being able to capture anything else. Because also, I mean, if we're going to allow that Norman starts at 100 and, like, goes to 1,000, the way to explain her staying with him is actually, he does kind of get it in. She's afraid to leave, and also she goes a little crazy.
Yeah. I think he describes her as being asleep.
Yeah.
Which I kind of liked.
She disassociates.
I'm curious how you guys responded to sort of the drop of blood being the motivating factor. Did that resonate to you, or is that perhaps too simple?
It did not particularly resonate with me because, in my case, I was not the one to leave. He left me, which I'm grateful for. But so I'd never really had that moment. But I do think it was interesting to read her, because I can see that happening. Like, there's never, like, what's the extreme that's going to actually make her leave? Given everything we know about Norman and everything he's done, like, if she was going to leave based on him doing something terrible, she would already have, because he had already done all these terrible things. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, because I guess, you at some point you just have had enough,
I was going to say, like, I think, my experience and how that relationship ended, I think, like, a lot of those kinds of relationships, it was just really messy. You know, it didn't have the kind of, like, literal, like, dot on the end,
right.
Like,
the period.
It was like he was always threatening to leave, and I was always begging him to come back. And actually what happened with us is, like, I kind of just was like, he left, and then I was kind of like, I don't know, maybe this is okay. Like,
yeah, me too. Yeah, I remember, like, pleading with him to come back, but in the back of my mind thinking, oh, thank God.
Yeah, I had this, like, one thing, he, like, for the last time said he was ending it, and I had this, like, weird, like, oh wait, like, that could be good.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's nice to be able to laugh about it now.
It is. Yes.
But what I was going to say, but I did appreciate the way, I think he did solve kind of the literary problem of, when it's so bad, how do you have a breaking point, right? By making it a symbolic thing rather than like him having to do a thing, which, by the way, I would be afraid to read. There's some, I guess we're going to get to the violence in this book because we have to.
But there are some scenes that he winds up kind of going soft focus on, and I'm like, whew, like
I know, me too.
It's funny you say that. We're definitely going to get to that because I have a lot of thoughts there. Mac, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say I haven't been in a like physically abusive relationship, but I've definitely been in some relationships that were extremely toxic and been in them for a long time. And I don't know, like the drop of blood being the catalyst or whatever. I think that it can easily be something like that, you know, that you don't realize that maybe she didn't even realize that that's why she was making that decision. But there's a point in the book later on where she thinks about it and she goes, all this good stuff that's happened to her, like it all started with that drop of blood. She she brings it all the way back to that moment, and then she realizes that was the moment when she made the decision to walk out and leave. So I don't know if it was like a conscious decision or just in the back of her mind when she decides to just walk out and just take off. But
yeah,
I do think that a lot of decisions are made like Anna was saying with the not or Jen, I can't remember which one said, but the idea of like not leaving because of something awful that happens. It's like many times it's just like a really considerably insignificant thing that happens that makes you just like finally decide to walk, I think.
Yeah, I guess for me that drop of blood sort of represented kind of a bodily breakdown, like the idea that after 14 years, now it's like the blood manifests even when he's not there. You know, it's like your body's starting to break down from like it's becoming unsustainable, and that drop of blood sort of represents like the weight of all the damage he's put on me is starting to, you know, come out even when he's not here. I'm just making the bed, you know, and I'm bleeding. And that to me, and obviously I think that it works better as sort of a motivating factor and a metaphor and a symbol than it does like perhaps a lived experience. But yeah, I guess that's what I took from it, which I thought was an interesting choice. And I will say that I agree with all of you that that, you know, that moment when she does leave, which I think is something like you can just see sort of like that King really did strain with this thing because he knows that that's not after 14 years, why is this what it's doing? But he really does a nice job, I think, of painting the slow march towards it and the kind of quiet realization of like, oh wow, I can actually do this. Like I can turn the doorknob and I can take the bank card and I can walk down the street. But then that fear of like every car that drives by is like him. He sees you. Yes. And that kind of stuff to me was really fascinating and very heartbreaking. But then that sense of exhilaration she feels, you know, once she reaches the bus station, but also the terror and confusion, all of that kind of stuff really worked for me just because, and this is something I was thinking a lot about is I think what I really love about at least the early parts of this book is because it's something that I think King does so well in all of his books, or well, anytime he does this, which is taking a character who's been through hell and they just sort of hit the road and they don't know where they're going. And it's about that journey of them going there and then building a life somewhere. Like we even saw it at the beginning of The Institute, which just came out. That book opens with a character sort of, you know, like hopping on a train. It doesn't know where it's taking him. And he just walks and he ends up in this small town. He gets a little job there. He knows nobody. And, you know, he just sort of like builds this life brick by brick. From the bottom up. And I think King does that sort of thing so well, and there's such sort of like a freeing and liberating kind of quality to that, because I think deep down, even if we are very happy in our lives, there is always that little dream of like, what if I went somewhere where nobody knew me, and what kind of life could I build, you know? And I think that's a very it's an idea that I think in our sort of hyper-connected, hyper-capitalist society now, I think it's a lot tougher to achieve that sort of thing. But I do think that it's a very almost romantic notion, and something that I thought worked really well in this book. But But yeah.
I was going to say, this is like a journey for reading this again for me. And it always tends to, I feel like this book tends to find me in times of my life when I need to read it. And because I remember, like, at the beginning, it was such a hard thing to read. And then there was, like, this, like, joy and this real empowerment. And then it just went downhill again. And it was really, and I kind of was getting really down and, like, kind of having a couple of really triggered days. And then it went back up again. So it was just, like, I was very emotionally invested in everything. And I will just say, for going forward, like, a lot of my attachments and my feelings about this book are emotional and not necessarily as critical as maybe some other books we'll talk about.
Sure. What were you going to say, Ana?
One is I can imagine reading this book at a time in my life when it would have done very similar stuff for me, as it has for Jenn. And the other thing I was going to say is that, I mean, the book does feel very forced, right? And in many places, the place it doesn't feel forced is that, initial journey that she has, like, out of the house, right? Mm-hmm. That feels like the kind of thing that might have come to him while he was writing, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of flow of, like, yeah, this is what it would be like. This is what it would be like. And there's a part of me that wishes he had I think I've said on the record before that I do prefer his, like, more supernaturally stuff.
Yeah.
To his psychological dramas. But there's a part of me that I would have read the story of, like, Rose and Norman without the fucking CD-ROM, like,
I agree. Yeah.
Like, I think he could have done something there and maybe had some other kind of supernatural element if he really wanted to do it. But, like, just the journey of Rose, like, coming, blossoming, I guess, is probably what he would want us to say. It's really, and all the characters she meets along the way, there's a few that are clunky, but like I said, I really like Bill Steiner. I love his weird fanboying of audiobooks.
Me too, as a fan of audiobooks.
I'm especially interested to hear your thoughts on the audiobook stuff, Jenn, once we get there, because I know you're a big fan. But yeah, I agree. There's a lot of that early stretch of the book. I think there's a lot to like. But there is sort of like, once the plot mechanics get going, there is a lot of machinery that's being kind of, I think, pulled, like, with sweat. But yeah, I guess, like, while we're here, I guess I'd love to talk a little bit about this being the last in this sort of trilogy about women overcoming the men in their life who are abusive. Like, what kind of evolution would you say that you see from Gerald's Game to Dolores Claiborne to Rose Madder? Did you guys have any, like, initial thoughts on that idea?
I will say I liked this book better than Dolores Claiborne. I guess it was not having to read the main dialect for 300 pages.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
I mean, that was, I think I shared in that episode, like, when I opened the book and it started that way, I was like, oh my God, is it really going to be this? And it was that. It was that for all of the pages. I mean, I do feel like he was really going for it here, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is I've kind of, like, I've written a couple of these about these abusive relationships, but I haven't gotten it just, like, I haven't really gone into the dude and the true malevolent nature of toxic masculinity and, like, although I'm sure he didn't phrase it that way. But I don't know quite how to work it on this podcast about, like, alluding to things we're going to talk about later. But, like, for me, I wrote down a couple times, like, this is commentary on toxic masculinity that occasionally becomes toxic itself.
Yes.
That's a really good way to put it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so stridently trying to indict homophobia that it becomes homophobic.
When we get to the characters, I have a whole section I want to discuss with that. But I think that's a really good point, and a good depiction of, sort of, because we spend time in the head of the abuser in this book, which we don't do in Gerald's Game or in Dolores Claiborne. And in those books, the men are more pathetic. They're abusers, but they're also, like, wimps. They're guys who abuse women because they want to feel strong themselves. And I think that the thing about Norman that's so terrifying is that, that he's sort of this, he is a beast, and I think that it really doesn't come down to like there isn't like a sensitive bone in his body. There's not like an emotional weakness in him necessarily. He just is fueled by hate and a desire for power, and I think that that is maybe what King felt like he took it too easy on the abusers in the previous two books, and that's something I was thinking about a lot because is how that whole nature of like the last thing that Norman is at least if we're talking in a broad sense is pathetic. I mean, this is a guy who's driven and he's good at what he does, but he's completely hollow inside, and the thing is, the things we do learn about him emotionally, it actually makes the character more problematic in a lot of ways. Because I think that there's definitely some 90s mentality in a lot of that. But so I think for me, I think he was like, well, I'm going to go out with a bang here, and I really want to bring the worst male forward, the worst abuser forward that I can, and I want him to suffer the worst death, of all of these. And I want him to not just, and I think it is about, and this is something I do find actually quite interesting about the book, but it's that whole concept of like taking something that is, very visceral and of this earth, like this whole idea of physical violence against a woman, but then elevating the abuser to this mythic proportion, and this idea that this character's, what motivates this character is not earthly. It is something like when you were talking about supernatural, Ana, it's like, and even if we didn't have the painting, I'm like, but there, and that what I think is interesting is that there's almost something supernatural to Norman in the sense that this is a guy who doesn't just, kill people. He eats them, That's
the only way to, in a way, like that's the only way, like I can explain or forgive the extraness of Norman is if there is, like, if he was to write this without the CD-ROM, then he would still have to give these hints that Norman is not completely human. Right.
And and so I think Norman reminds me, as I've talked about sort of the bully archetype as it exists within King on the pod quite a bit before. It's like the Henry Bowers kind of syndrome where you have a character who is so evil that their evil feels, mythic in its own sense, but it feels larger than human. It feels like it's motivated by some kind of undercurrent of evil, which is in it. Obviously, that's Pennywise. Like Henry Bowers is basically a patsy whose sort of inner rottenness is exploited by the supernatural presence. And I think that's true in a lot of other King bullies as well. But with Norman, we don't have that. He's not a puppet. There's nobody pulling his strings like there is Henry Bowers. And so I think that's what makes him a difficult character to wrap your brain around a little bit, because he's not, this is a human man who has been elevated to this supernatural quality of evil, but it sort of exists in and of himself. And I don't know, and I think that makes for a character that's hard to grasp sometimes, especially when all of his hatred is sort of consumed in a lot of kind of social justice areas. And again, we'll talk more about that. But yeah, I think that's interesting.
We have to. I want to just bookmark something really quick, which is the idea about whether or not his strings are being pulled.
Okay, yeah.
Which is the Zebul. Like,
oh boy,
yeah.
Who is Zebul?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question.
Well, yes, basically yes, but I mean, that's a problematic. Yes, it's not problematic in the same way that he's problematic in other ways. It's just sort of literarily problematic, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely touch on that in a bit. But I guess another question I want to ask, which is, and we've touched on this a little bit, but I do think it's an important question because, and I think this relates to when you said, Ana, about the concept of he's writing about toxic masculinity in such a way that the prose becomes toxic in its own way. Mm-hmm. And I think that I wonder about that, and I guess I want your guys' opinions. Is that when he's writing about a miscarriage, and he's writing about a pregnant woman being beaten, and the language to me is so vile, and there is such a. And I guess, and I mean, this is a sign that King is obviously very good at writing violence, but when it's this kind of violence and it's something so personal, is all the description and the vivid imagery, is that a literary effective quality, or is it exploitive in its own way? Is it rubbing perhaps someone's face in something that they don't need to revisit? Because you talked about them going soft focus at some points in the book, thank God, but here, like in that first chapter, it is most definitely not soft focus. So like when you read that sort of thing, what is your reaction to that?
I actually kind of liked that it was as extreme as it is. And I will say, because I feel like this is the kind of thing that is not talked about very often. And I say this as a person who has had a miscarriage with my first husband. It was not brought on in the same way, but like, I remember it was like 10 or 11 years ago, and nobody was talking about it at all. And I just felt so alone. And it was also at like that Hollywood baby boom time. So I remember just walking through the grocery store and just seeing all these magazines with these pregnant celebrities, and having gone through this thing that like can feel so shameful, and you can feel like, and once you start talking about it with people, you realize that it happens so often, but people don't talk about it. And like, there's a specific moment where she's talking about like reaching down and hoping that it's pee that she's going to see on her fingers. And, like, that's happened to me. And this is the only time that I've ever seen it or heard it. And so it just felt like somebody saw that experience in a way that I don't see recognized that often. And I did. So yeah, that was kind of my feelings about that particular thing. I think the relationship between Rose and Norman is the part that doesn't feel exploitative to me. I think Norman's relationship with everybody else is where I start to see a lot of toxicity. And I feel like if we were, because I mean, there's a conversation about this with Antebellum right now. And I think a lot of that is coming back to like, we just don't talk about these kinds of relationships very often. And if this was a very like known thing, and like people, like women were believed a lot more or listened to a lot more, I feel like it might cross over to exploitative. But here I feel like it's just, thank God somebody's finally saying what it's actually like, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting perhaps what our expectations as men and women approaching this book are, because I, like Jenn, I did not have a problem with the miscarriage scene. And felt it, and also had this feeling of, I personally haven't had a miscarriage, but I've had friends who've had them. And I've also just been a woman who talks about this kind of stuff that I know is hard to talk about in any circle, you know, but there's a lot about it that is sort of coded as being incredibly gross, and you're not supposed to talk about it at all. Right?
Yeah. It's like shameful.
Right. And it's liberating to find a group of a circle of people that you can talk about this stuff with, you know? So the violence against Rose did not bother me. The park bench scene almost made me stop reading the book. It is pornographic. And actually, that's not fair to pornography. Like, it is, like I said, it, you know, so stridently trying to indict homophobia that it becomes homophobic.
Right.
Like, it is just, and it's just like, he did not go soft focus in that scene. Like,
no. Yeah, so in that scene, basically we have, we basically have this person who comes forward who has found Norman's bank card and was basically trying to steal some money from it, and Norman is trying to get some info from him to help find Rose, and basically, crushes the guy's testicles in his hand, but
first giving him a hand job.
But first giving him a hand job. Yeah. Which is a very, very bizarre choice. And there's also moments in the description of that character that is being attacked, whose name I believe is Ramon. There's talk about him being molested as a child and a lot of other things in there that make it, that I think sort of paint a very in some ways, insensitive portrait of homosexuality, and then also the way that Norman sort of exploits it and speaks to him and speaks down to him and then attacks him and all of that. I think pornographic is a good word for it. It is, it's definitely a very, very uncomfortable scene. I was shocked by it.
And all the sort of homosocial violence, I guess, is the stuff that made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like the scene with the Traveler's Aid guy.
Yeah, Peter.
Also,
oh yeah, Peter Stoic.
Yeah,
that's where he pulls away. He pulls away on that one, and I remember I literally was like, I wrote, whew, like, at the point that point in the book, because I was like worried we were going to see all of it,
especially given what happens.
I actually quite love the way that that's written, because it kind of feels dreamlike in a way, and and Norman later talks about how he sort of blacked out during a lot of it. So I think that actually suits sort of the general air of that whole thing. But what were you going to say, Mac?
Oh, I was just going to say that, like, it was a strange read for me because I didn't know anything about it. And then coming in, it almost felt like a Bachman book for a while. Because it was so just like normal, or not normal, but it was awful things happening. But there was no supernatural element to it until so late in the game that it felt weird when it happens. So the first whole section there where she leaves and she gets to the town and everything, I was finding it really difficult. I like the whole opening sequence. I was kind of like, okay, I think you have to be this graphic. I think you have to be this blunt about this because of the reasons that both of you noted about how it's not talked about a lot. So I got that. And then obviously why he pulls back on some other things. But like usually for this podcast, we're sitting here and I'm like waiting for these violent sequences so I can like get out my notes and start writing stuff down for the cemetery because that was gross and violent.
Right.
And this, I just had a sick feeling in my stomach while reading this for the most part. And I was like, I don't even know if I want to write this one down for cemetery.
Yeah.
Like, cause I felt like in a weird way that by doing this or doing some of these categories that we were kind of, there were things in here that I felt like, okay, I can write that one down. But like some of it, I felt like we were almost kind of like poking fun or making light of like things that people actually really deal with in real life. That is written in a way that is like, yeah, this happens to people. So it was it was difficult. And I was curious if y'all thought that it was too much or if it was exploitive, because I definitely felt that during it. It was really hard to kind of walk that line, like, okay, what's like king and like okay to like tackle in terms of like violence or like just bringing it up in certain categories, and then what's just kind of like off limits. And I agree with any of the moments with the homosexual talk. It's so weirdly, it is so time-stamped in the 90s in terms of like, someone writing about that then maybe, but at the same time, that park bench sequence was confusing. And in the way that if you're trying to say that, especially how they drop the fact that like, oh, well, Norman was molested. So like, that's kind of like irresponsible because then you're kind of saying, oh, well, what are you trying to say? Like, gay people had to have been molested or, what I mean? Or like if you're molested, then you turn into this deviant or something. And I don't think that's the case I think that sadly is the case for a lot of people, but I think it's also not for everybody,
Yeah.
So it was like, if you're going to throw stuff out there like that, or even just like, I think there was something else too that he mentions about Norman's past. I think he just gets more specific about his dad or something.
Yeah, I've got some stuff to discuss.
He gets pretty specific about his dad. And I agree that like the whole he's this way because he was molested is terrible.
It's really bad. But I like what you're saying, Mac, about like I struggled with the same concept of like, well, this is scaring me and it's horrifying, but I'm not going to put it in the cemetery because, like you said, this is not like, sometimes King is fun violence. Like we love to watch, a dumb character get killed or whatever. But this is obviously written in a very different way, and I think it relates in some ways to the way, I've talked a lot about The Library Policeman and how that book affected me when I was young in a very visceral way that made me sick. And, I went to my dad and I'm like, help. like I read something that scared me. And I think it's very similar in this book. And I also was just like, I'm not going to put that in the cemetery because that, this is not this is not, and I guess that's like sort of what I was trying to get at with the question was like, it's not horror in the Stephen King sense that we know Stephen King. It's horror in a very different kind of way. And I think that you have to approach it and process it a little bit differently. And I guess my worry is that, or at least my worry in the things that I was thinking about was, in a broad sense, was that whole question of like, is by King writing it this vividly, is he almost forcing us to engage with it in the same way that we engage with his other horror? And and I think that was sort of a murky question that I was grappling with, but it was really good to hear your guys' takes on that. Yeah.
Can I offer a theory? Are there any other, all of us, I guess, are writers of some sort or another, right?
Sure.
And I've written fiction as well. And something that just occurred to me about the graphic nature of some of this stuff and how it feels so non-supernatural, non-metaphorical, all of that. But and yet just really he seems to like putting just a lot into it. Sometimes when I'm having trouble writing, like that's sort of what I feel like I do.
Yeah.
Like I just get out my toolbox as a writer, and just like throw shit.
Yeah.
I know how to do this part. I know how to make this sound like this.
Yeah.
And so I could see him getting into an uncomfortable place and being like, well, I know how to do violence. Let me just like drill down on the violence. I mean, I'm sure there's more, but like when I read that thing about how he felt like this novel was really forced, I was like, yes, that is what this novel feels like. It feels like he was trying really hard. And I think those scenes of violence might be a place where he was like, all right, well, I know how to do this part.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting
too, because I also read that because this isn't technically like the third Eclipse novel, it's just the third novel that covers the topic of like abused women. And I think that somewhere in here, I feel like this was meant to be that, and then as it just kept getting forced and just kept getting away from him, I think he was like, yeah, I'm going to take out that Eclipse page. I don't want this to be a part of that trilogy, technically. I think that's still coming. I think I read something that said something about, like, the third Eclipse novel was supposed to be, like, a character from Gerald's Game in Dolores Meeting or something. I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. But I'm surprised that this wasn't it, because I always thought that this was the end of that trilogy, and it is the end of a trilogy per se because of the topic. But
there's just no Eclipse.
It feels very much like getting it out of his system. Like there was like this phase of writing, and I hope this doesn't sound controversial, but I have a theory about what this phase kind of was for him. And I say this as a person in recovery, so I'm not making any kind of judgment on King or speculating about any of his own actions, but I wonder if this is him exploring what his substance abuse was like for Tabitha, and kind of just trying to think through like what it was like to live in the house with him. Because I remember thinking when I read Cujo, like, oh, this is how he looks at himself. He looks at himself as like when he's using, he just becomes like an animal who can't like control himself. And I wonder if this is him kind of exploring the other side of it. And I've had the same struggles with Dolores Claiborne and Rose Madder as what to say about what in the cemetery, because there are things in these novels that terrify me. Yeah. But it's disturbing, It's not scary. It's not like Ben Mears walking up the stairs knowing what's in his bedroom. It's that, oh, this actually happens, and like, oh, this did happen, and like trying to like this movie, or it's not a movie. It helped me pull up some like repressed memories that I had, and so that was like, and I don't know if scary is the word for that, but it was like upsetting and like visual or visceral, and just, I think disturbing is the word I keep coming back to. But it feels like he was trying to explore something, and he was like, okay, I can't do this again. I've got to get it all out here, and I've got to just put it all out on the paper. And like when I think about the Greek mythology, I think that's him exploring a feeling that he's trying to get. And if I can like kind of make the bridge to that feeling, I really love it. I don't think it necessarily works, but sure. I can see what he's trying to do,
Yeah, that's a good pivot, actually, because I wanted to talk about the myth a little bit in the hook section, because I do think it does serve as sort of an encapsulation of the supernatural element of this book, which essentially involves a painting that she buys at a thrift store, basically, and it's a very unremarkable painting, but she's drawn to it for some reason or another. She brings it to her home, and then suddenly elements of the painting begin to come to life, and soon she is able to enter the painting, and there she encounters many different elements of Greek myth that are sort of mishmashed together, and it was fun. So please correct me if you guys are smarter than me on this. Myth was never something I studied very much, so I did some research, obviously, but from what I was reading in people who are more versed in that and their readings of Rose Matter, it was very much sort of a pick and choose kind of thing for King here. But just to run through a few of the things we have here, there's the river that Rose encounters when she is going through sort of the underworld of the ruins and everything within the painting, and that is obviously a reference to the river Lethe. Is it Lethe or Leith?
I've always thought it was Leith, but...
Leith? Okay, cool. I'm going to go with that. And that was known in... it was one of the 5 rivers in the underworld of Hades, also known as the River of Unmindfulness. And essentially, anybody who drank from it experienced complete forgetfulness. And that is exactly what happens, or at least is the threat within this book, is that if Rose splashes in it in any way, shape, or form, she will lose all of her memories. And we'll talk more about that, because I do think King does some interesting... uses that as sort of a way to explore some interesting questions about somebody who's been through abuse. Norman is sort of rendered as the mythical Minotaur, sort of half bull, half man. And the Minotaur has, in Greek myth, dwelt at the center of a labyrinth, maze-like construction. And here, obviously, we have a bull in a maze, and then our villain sort of becomes that bull in a very sort of... I don't know. I kind of like it, and we'll talk more about that. But it's like in a somewhat heavy-handed way. So we also have that aspect, and then the bull's name is also Arrhenius, or I don't know how to say it.
My audiobook said Arrhenius.
Arrhenius, perfect. It's so nice you have the audiobook. Yeah. So okay. And they were also known as the Furies, and essentially, what I thought was interesting here was that Arrhenius is essentially a female deity that takes vengeance on men, whosoever hath sworn a false oath. And so I think that obviously that's really relevant here, because the idea of marrying someone, saying you'll take care of them, the false oath, and obviously he did not take care of her. But that being the name of the bull, I think is
weird,
and something I had trouble wrapping my brain around a little bit. This isn't necessarily Greek myth, but the name Dorcas, which is the woman Wendy who Rose encounters in the painting, who is sort of her guide in a way. Basically, Dorcas is a name. Also, it translates to Tabitha, and basically that was the first woman that was depicted in the Christian Bible. So, and in the Bible, she's a generous person who sewed for others and gave to the needy. So that was essentially the connection I found there. And then clearly, Rose Matter, the sort of rotting alter ego of our hero that is encountered within the painting, is kind of clearly a goddess of vengeance. She says, I repay. That is, kind of the repeated phrase. And I think sort of the easy connection there is, Ana, you called yourself Adrestia at the beginning of this. And so that is basically an epithet for the goddess of vengeance, also known as Nemesis. And then there's other ones that I can't pronounce, and acted as a nurse to the infant Zeus, and her name means she who cannot be escaped, which I thought was also interesting within the context of this. That whole, I think there is that concept of, can you escape when you leave an abusive relationship? So obviously a lot of different themes pop up here, and I guess in a broad sense, I'd love to ask sort of what of these myths stood out to you and did you find effective?
I like the idea of the river of unmindfulness, but I gotta say, when we hit this part of the book, I was like, what are we doing? I think like the Minotaur idea has just been like done a billion times. So when they kind of alluded to that early on, I was just kind of not into that. And that was like the first thing, it's like, oh, go in there and there's a bulb. And, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. It's a maze. All right. But yeah, I think the River of Mindfulness I thought was interesting. I don't know. The Greek mythology of this just didn't particularly.
What did you find interesting about the River of Unmindfulness?
Well, I just thought that it's one of those things that they dropped so early. I thought, okay, well, this is definitely coming back later. And then I think what you were saying in terms of, that kind of paralleling being a survivor and the way that they end up using it later on, I thought that worked for me. Like I was like, okay, then this sequence at the beginning where she first goes into the paint, that makes more sense to me, and I'll go along with that. But everything else just kind of fell flat. Just like you said, it did seem like he was kind of picking and choosing and not really paying too much attention to the source material, except for like the broad theme of it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, if you're gonna, you either kind of have to go one way or the other, and then there's some other weird connections we'll talk about later, so that makes it even muddier. So I don't know, but yeah, the overall the connections didn't really land for me.
Sure,
except for that one.
I think the River of Mindfulness for me, I think specifically is interesting because it raises that question of like, if you've been through hell, if you've been through abuse, if you've suffered, obviously you would want to forget it and let it go. But will you grow as a person then? Will you grow from that experience? And I think that is sort of one of the central struggles of the, the epilogue and that whole question. So yeah, it's like, I like the themes it brings up. The presence I'm not sure about. What were you going to say, Ana?
Yes, I think maybe we'll be in agreement on the River of Lethe being a well-used piece of mythology in this, sewn in pretty well. I also had a problem with all of this section, in part because, like, one of the reasons I love King, and is true, I love his exposition. I love all of the interconnectedness. I love how he says, well, this has to happen because of this, right? And he sometimes even does it in a pretty artful way, where he doesn't give you, like, the complete backstory of whatever monster that exists, but he kind of like hints at like some, connections to some other things that we might know about.
Yeah.
And why the fuck did she have to go to get the kid out of the maze?
I know. It makes no sense.
It's just like, what?
Oh, I have a theory about that.
Ooh, let's hear it.
Let's hear
the theory, but he doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but he doesn't, besides the fact that it's her child, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But like, why does it have to be Rose that does it? Like, that was the sort of thing. And also, why does Dorcas talk like Butterfly McQueen?
Oh my God. Yes. I could live without the whole Dorcas Wendy thing because I find it so problematic. Yeah. And exploitative. Yeah. That whole part bothered me.
It's a little rough.
Yeah. My thing. So this part didn't really bother me this time. I think mostly because I knew what was going to happen and it kind of just like washed over me. I was like, oh, okay, this is the part where they go into the temple. But I think like the metaphor that I think he's going for here is like Rose is Rose matter. And I feel like that's like when you're in this kind of relationship and when these things happen, like you can't think about these things every single day or you will like you have to bury it down. And there are times when she talks about like not being able to cry out or not being able to like make a sound because it'll just like awaken the bull, I guess, to just really lean into that metaphor. And so the way that I saw this time was like, this is Rose's like repressed feelings. Like this is all of the rage that she has had to store and not been able to escape. And I think like the baby to me, because she says it's the same baby, I wonder like if she had repressed that memory so much and now that she's out of this, she's having to kind of process everything. And so going into this world and going to find this baby is almost like a way of like digging down into her self-conscious or her subconscious and trying to like pull those memories up. And like that she's like connecting with this goddess is her way of like finding the strength to do that. And I think about Mrs. Todd's Shortcut because That's another story where a woman kind of becomes a goddess and like empowers herself to kind of rise above the limitations that she's had in her life. And so when I was reading this, like, this is something that I really connected to a lot. Now, I will agree, technically and literally, it does not work. And there are a lot of problems with the execution here. But I really liked, as somebody who's trying to pull up repressed memories right now, like, I loved the image of like externalizing it as this story. And so it doesn't seem so like you're not looking at the exact thing. You're looking like right next to it in a way that you can kind of understand it until you're ready to look at the exact thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
it
absolutely.
makes total sense, but I think you're being incredibly generous.
I will give you that. You're probably right.
You're reading something into it that I wish he had put there.
I know, and I feel like he had like the seed of the idea. And
like even the seeds, the fucking pomegranate seeds,
right?
Like why?
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about that. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, we'll get to that. I'll just say that I kind of love this discourse just because it reminds me of the book in the way where it's just like everybody's like, why do you love that painting? And it's like because of what you're putting onto it, which I have many things that I do that with, where it's like the emotional connection is so strong that it's like I can overlook sort of the maybe the shoddy execution because this taps into something for me. So
and I am always very like, I am one to just let go of whatever in the story doesn't work for me, just to kind of make my point. Like, I project a lot of my shit onto horror.
Oh yeah, same.
Oh, we all do. I mean, that's cool. That's why horror exists. I just think like I think usually King, one of the things I love about him is he gives us some handholds for his metaphors and for what he's trying to do. And I think you're right that like that is a good literary reason for Rose to be the one to have to do this. But I wanted a fucking reason why she had I wanted
right, and it doesn't make sense.
I wanted like
Rose
Matter to say I can't go do this because of my whatever, my skin's falling off, and Dorcas can't do it because she has to stay with the donkey. Yeah, but you're the one that has to go do this. You're the only one that can go get our child because XYZ. And the reason the pomegranate seeds are important, I don't know.
It's going to be important later. Trust me, guys. We need this.
But even
and this is the part that I feel forced.
You have to go through the garden, then you have to go through the trees, and then like it's like why don't like I don't know. Like it's just like he kept inventing like maybe one of these will be scary. Like first there's the temple, and then there's the garden, and then there's the I don't know.
There's
like,
the statue with the huge cock.
Yeah.
It also seemed like really strange to have, and really early for Rose to be going on this quest where she like saves the day and gets the kid and brings it back and like essentially does everything, like
perfectly
that she was supposed to do perfectly. And you're like,
okay,
there's like 200 more pages of the book. Like she's done, But I do agree though with Jen in terms of I like the idea of that. I think that maybe that's where he was maybe thinking of going. Just the idea that Rose Matter is the broken or abused or destroyed part of her that can't continue on, and now that you've taken steps towards a more healthy life and like you still have to deal with this stuff. You still have to go into the temple and get and save, your soul or, whatever the kid's supposed to represent, I mean, and then knowing that like, just because you're better doesn't mean like there aren't going to still be obstacles. But again, that's how I guess I'm looking at it now, but this is like, weeks after I read it.
Yeah. The seeds for me, it's like, the metaphor is not elegant at all. It's like, it's really like, you feel like I feel like I'm doing the work that he didn't do to help connect the dots here. And that always drives me a little bit crazy as a reader. And, but I guess for me, it's like, I was just interpreting it like, okay, like you can't, obviously this stuff can't be erased. Like she who cannot be escaped is the goddess of vengeance, right? It's like that anger and that rage over those 14 years of your life you're never going to get back, or, that's going to surface. Like that's not something that can just be shut away or forgotten. And so the seeds for me represented this kind of concept of it was doing something positive with all of that rage. And so like basically allowing it to evolve in your mind, to process, to help you grow as a person. And so her planting them, growing this tree and everything, for me, that was just sort of like, okay, I've compartmentalized these feelings and these hard things of my life into this tree, and I can separate myself from it, but I revisit it every year because I can't forget that part of my life. You know, like, this is the work, sweaty work I'm doing.
Like, y'all should
get
get
a lot of work
royalties,
there,
I
Randall.
swear. Like, you
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we're making this
Bunch of
book a lot
King
better.
apologists. Yeah, it reminded me a lot of the ending of the Babadook. You know,
Yeah.
And the tree part
Oh,
is
boy,
actually the
another
part.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah, love or hate that movie. I shockingly love that movie, given everything I just said. But it's like the tree part is actually my favorite part of the book, and it's one of the two reasons that I'm like extremely grateful that this book exists, because that is like it's like it's stored in you, and it shoots out, you know, and you can't. And I feel like the tree is a way of her like managing it and like maintaining it and acknowledging it, and so I do really like that. But I completely agree with you guys. I don't think it's handled well, and I do think I like how you said it. I feel like we're doing a lot of the heavy lifting for him. I think in this particular case, I'm willing to do a lot of that just because it's something I personally connect with. But it's weird because you step into the painting, and I feel like as a reader, it's like we step into a different story.
Yep.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
I will say,
I actually, there's a part, again, like, I think I would love two books here. Like, sort of the Desperation Regulators thing, which is like one story is Rose and Norman, right?
That would be cool.
And then the other story is the story of Rose Madder and Dorcas, who should stop talking like Butterfly McQueen, but could be a fine character. And the disease that they have, you know, and like what her journey has been, and like, I don't know, like I could see doing a story about the land in that painting. Yeah. You know, like maybe it'd be more novella than novel, but I was curious about that land, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and I even didn't mind, like, there was a part of me that was like, okay, this isn't going to be Greek. This is going to be something that he's invented that's, you know, kind of a play on all of that. But no, it's just kind of a mishmash. Like,
well, did you get the, Ana, did you get the Dark Tower references?
The Lud, City of Lud.
Yeah, there's a hand.
So
like,
it is kind of
loose. Yeah, he loosely tries to connect it to the Dark Tower world, which I'm not sure I fully buy. So.
Yeah, well, like if he had placed it in the Dark Tower world, like, or just like one of the levels, right? Like one of the beams or whatever. I think that I would have, again, that would have been kind of a handhold for a King reader to be like, okay, you know, like this is part of that, you know, mythology, not Greek mythology, but that mythology.
I think he felt like he was doing that a little bit by adding those few mentions in there. Yeah, but it's make it a little bit more easy to swallow. But I don't think
he really does the. That's very thin connective tissue.
I know. I wonder if that was a retcon.
Yeah, like as fun as it is, like I love seeing a good Dark Tower reference, you know. But again, I feel like I'm doing the heavy lifting, trying to connect it to Roland and Company, you know. So but yeah, I guess let's like one last question within this Greek aspect of it, and it's more of an opinion thing than anything, but because obviously the metaphor is not hard to parse here, but Norman basically pulling a bull mask off a child, putting it on his own head, and then it's slowly sort of grafting to his skin and him becoming that bull in that manner. What did you guys think about that whole section?
You know?
Okay, well, do I get to talk about the whole who is Zebul here?
Yeah,
let's talk about it here, yeah.
Because that's what was problematic for me about, I mean, I actually sort of, I mean, obviously, there's a glaring, like, siren about what's about to happen as soon as he pulls it off, so it's not a surprise or anything, but I was okay with that. Like, I'm like, you know, King does makes metaphor literal a lot. That's kind of what horror is, right? But when the bull starts talking to him, part of me almost wanted it to be that it was an actual other entity, perhaps from the painting. That was actually sort of, I was like, oh, like that's what's going to get revealed somehow, is that there's a war of good and evil happening in the painting. And, you know, Rose and Norman are going to be the, you know, choose your fighter, right? but no.
Yeah, I agree.
Instead, it just seems like it's just he slips a gear from reality, and it's just him talking to himself. Except the bull knows more than Norman.
Right.
Yeah,
I struggle with that.
Felt like he was being taken over by something else because of that fact, because it does seem to be like one step ahead.
But what is
it,
Matt?
you already know there is this bull presence in the maze and stuff from earlier, I felt like I didn't like that because to me it felt like, oh, okay, well then you're kind of saying that like you're kind of like taking some of the responsibility off Norman's shoulders, and now he's possessed, so it's not really like, where does he end and where does this begin, and has he always been that? And that's kind of dangerous too. Like, like, are you trying to you're trying to really make a point here, or like if he had just continued to be this awful human being that just lost his mind, like maybe from his point of view he's like, I can't get this mask off, but then when Rosie sees him, it's just a rubber mask. Like maybe he just starts losing. You know what I mean? Like that would have been a stronger choice, I think. But when he actually starts kind of turning into the bull, I just kind of felt like, this doesn't. It didn't pay off for me. I mean, even though he goes out a really awful way, it's just like, well, is it really you, or is the bull the one that's getting got?
Yeah.
You know,
I kind of love it because, like, in just sort of a broad way, I think, because like I think the metaphor is like very heavy-handed, and then again, like as we just discussed, it's not fully fleshed out or thought through. But I think on a visceral sort of like horror level, like if we're talking about like, Stephen King horror 1.0, I love the concept of like this kid's rubber mask like suddenly turning into this mythic object, right? Like becoming this vessel for whatever it is that is speaking to Norman, and becoming this thing that he uses as a puppet on his hand, and then it sort of grafts onto his skin like as he puts it on, and he wears it when he attacks them in the apartment building. Like that is like to me a very horrifying kind of image, like this monster of a man coming at you wearing this rubber mask on his face. Like, and I think some of it reminded me of a book that I adored when I was a little boy, as a Goosebumps book. I don't know if you guys remember it, but
the Haunted Mask.
The Haunted Mask, where she puts the mask on and it kind of becomes her head. That's a very spooky concept to me, and it's something that when I was a kid, I was always kind of afraid to put like full head masks on because I was always worried about never being able to take it off. And it's such a silly sort of thing, but I will say that I found those sections to be sort of viscerally exciting because I love the image of him being this kind of lunatic monster in that mask, because that would be so scary to me.
And I like that too, Rand. I mean, I do like that idea. I just felt like a different book. Like like to marry what had happened before and Norman's character to that sounds like a really cool killer in a different book that doesn't have all of Norman's baggage and Norman's like abusive history and all that stuff. Like is just kind of, this serial killer or whatever. Like, I don't know. It just seemed like it went a different way all of a sudden, and I'm like, am I supposed to like revel in this like the murdery stuff now? Like I have more stuff in Cemetery later on in the book because it just started getting so detached from reality. I was like, oh, okay, it's okay to mention like this and this and this now. Right. It doesn't feel so real anymore. But like that didn't work for me. I like the idea of the mask thing, but I don't think it works in this book.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like, I will say that, I mean, you brought up Henry Bowers earlier, Randall, and there is a thread in King's work where if someone kind of, for whatever reason, is human, but they engage in more and more evil, like they open up some kind of, it's almost like they open up a doorway, right?
Yeah.
For the big bad to come through.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And there was a part of me that was like, okay, so that's what's happening. Like, that was my kind of like, maybe that's what's happening here. Is like, again, like I was ready for it to be some entity, another god, basically.
Yeah.
There's Rose Matter, and then there's some other entity that also needs to have this battle. But instead, it was just like a weird fake comic relief stuff. Like,
Yeah. Well, this is
like the bull talking, like, what is it? Like the bull, Zibble, and like I just open up a random page.
What is the dialect of the accent that they're going for there?
I don't know.
With it's supposed to be
is what
with the Greek.
I don't know. I think he's.
Am I missing something? I was like, I mean, I get it, but I was also like, well, Wouldn't you just double down on the other
Spanish, right?
idea?
So
It
like,
is. It's like a Spanish kind of. Well, okay. So Stephen King reads the Norman sections in the audiobook.
Really?
Yeah, he does,
Oh,
which
wow.
is
really?
really interesting. Yeah, except it kind of broke my heart to hear him read some of the stuff he wrote for Norman. But yeah, it was like a zibul, and it felt again like a stereotype, you know?
Yeah.
Which was, this is the part like where it feels very plotted. You know, it feels like I've got to get him into that maze, and I've got to make it very clear that he's the bull, and so this is how it happens, you know? And I feel like maybe, I don't know if I necessarily need 2 books, but I think there's just a lot missing between the connection from A to B there, you know?
Yeah.
Feels like it's A to D, you know?
Yeah, I've got one final question, and then we'll move on. And this is sort of, I don't know. We don't have to dig too deep into this, but I thought sort of with kind of a lot of the things that are happening in the country today, the book's treatment of police, I thought, was interesting. And the general concept of that I actually found quite refreshing. The idea that Rose is, you know, her husband's a detective, and she's like, well, cops protect each other, and she's that's, you know, that kind of presents that hurdle for her, and it's something she has to get through. And I wonder if at all, like once we do meet the detectives near the end, and one of them is kind of like, your idea about cops is all wrong, you know? Like I had a moment where I was kind of like, don't say that to her. Like,
not all cops.
Yeah, not all cops. Exactly.
Yes.
And so I thought that was, I guess, like, I found that to be a weirdly timely kind of a thing, especially just because we see so many stories about cops covering up for each other, especially in the case of, you know, the shooting of minorities and things of that nature. So I'm wondering if that kind of, if that stood out to you at all when you were reading.
Well, I wrote
Absolutely.
ACAB in the margins.
Yeah.
So
There you go. How about you guys, Jen, Mac?
Yeah, it definitely, it's hard not to see that connection right now. And yeah, the cop at the end was kind of like, it reminded me of like Brad Pitt at the end of 12 Years a Slave. It's like, okay, here's your out, you know, just so we can say not all cops, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I liked seeing that depiction, and I mean, I don't know. Go ahead, Mike.
No, it's really difficult. I felt like, yes, it's one of those things where it's kind of like when you see those stories of like cops doing good things right now. You're like, okay,
propaganda.
Yes, there are some cops out there that go do things that are good. I'm not saying, you know, not all cops are, but it's the idea of like, we're trying to tackle this right now. That's just like, that's not important. Like, we're not saying that doesn't happen. We don't, that's distracting from the issue. You know what I mean? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that cop at the end, I felt like King probably felt like, well, in the early 90s, probably, especially, it was like, okay, well, you know, not all cops are like this, whatever. But Hale says, and I quote, "You know a lot about cops, but most of what you know is wrong." And that was like, fuck
Jesus
you.
Christ.
Because that's bullshit. Because I feel like most of what she knows it might be specific to that thing, but she was definitely not fucking wrong. Like all those cops that he hung out with or that were in his unit, and that other guy that was with him when they, you know, raped and killed, was it Wendy?
Wendy, yeah.
Like, you know, like she knows what she knows, you know, like, fuck you.
Right.
Like, yes, maybe I'm sure there are good cops out there or whatever, but like,
but you don't get to say that to her, yeah.
You know?
Right.
Yeah. So it was kind of like, yeah.
I like that insight that it's almost like it's the idea of that that's not what we're talking about here, you know? Like, yeah, you're right, but like, you didn't need to bring that. It's sort of like bringing up the black on black crime, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the same misdirect. And I feel like he just didn't have to have it, right? Like, you just could have, I don't know, like you could have no cops involved, although it'd be weird.
Yeah.
I actually wouldn't. Like, if she just refused to go to the cops, like there's actually kind of a, like, that'd be sort of interesting. But
like a vigilante thing.
Yeah. But anyway.
And I wonder if it was just him not knowing how to get out of the story, if there wasn't some like authority figure that she could go to, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. Well, I think it's time for us to move on and talk about a little something called structure and format.
Look at
Welcome to Structure and Format. This is the section of the podcast where we discuss structure and format. Obviously, not a ton to dig into here. Pretty straightforward book, but I do find it notable that all of Norman's chapters are written in italics. And I'm kind of curious if you guys think that there's a specific reason for that, or if you like that, and, any responses to that?
Did not like it.
I actually didn't realize that was happening until I started going through my notes because it was audio.
Right.
But I did enjoy the different voices, and it kind of, especially given how disturbing what we hear Norman say, I think it kind of helped me mentally prepare for that, and just getting out of the Rose headspace, because it's just like it's night and day.
Right.
Right. I didn't need the italics. It was just like it was almost hard to read at one point. I was like, we get it. It's another chapter. It's like it's not her, obviously. Like if you're a seasoned reader at all, like
yeah. I think for me it was like I think he just wanted to make sure that, like, I mean, obviously the tone of it, like the language of it immediately distinguishes it as a different tone and a different character. But I think that everything Norman says is so nefarious, King wanted it to feel like he was narrating that, like even though it is this third person sort of narrator, I think he really wanted it to feel in those moments like this is Norman speaking and that is a different tenor than Rose speaking.
Yeah, it's like I don't think I've ever seen it in his other books, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think so. I mean, he uses italics a lot.
Yeah, well, yeah, because even though he supposedly doesn't like adverbs or adjectives, he really likes caps and italics and exclamation. Anyway, it was. I did notice it, and I found it kind of distracting, actually.
Yeah.
So
it was weird.
It was used here and there, but it's like some of these Norman bits are like 15, 20 pages. You're like, okay, we got it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I will say about audiobooks too, which is kind of like Dolores Claiborne. Like I didn't notice any of that. And so, because like, as I was doing my notes, I was like, oh, this is a lot of italics. And it would be one thing if it was like a page. And it gets to the point where he would use italics, he has to use just straight print, to like make that text stand out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do
audiobooks, guys. They're awesome.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, I guess I didn't even think about that. I remember I saw that. Is it the actress Blair Brown that does it? Yeah, I remember seeing that she did the audiobook when I was doing my research, and I guess I didn't even think about the idea of like, oh man, did they have like a woman reading the Norman parts as well? And so it makes sense that they would have King do it. Yeah, so that's super interesting, but not something I had considered. The only other thing I really caught here was something I feel like we always love to discuss in structure and format, which is King's penchant for the foreshadow. And I only caught one here, but it was, on the same level as a lot of his that we kind of love to hate a little bit. But it's when she's on the motorcycle with Bill and they're heading back to the picnic. And it's after that lovely scene of them by the water. And it says, as they passed beneath a bright pink banner reading, "Swing into summer with daughters and sisters," Rosie felt a burst of happiness, which she would remember later on that long, long day with sickened horror. And then I think it hops right into a Norman chapter, like he's on his way, Yeah. And those are the things I always loved when I was young that I think I find a little cheesy now, but I still mostly enjoy because I think it's like it has that kind of pulpy sort of propulsive nature.
I have a ham-fisted. I'll make a segue here just about ham-fistedness, which is he never actually says they're in Chicago, right? Like there's a weird, like he doesn't say the city name except when he says like Chicago Bulls or White Sox. Like there's a strange, like he just keeps saying the city.
Yep, I had that in my notes. I was like, what city is this? Because there were some times when I would read it. I thought it was New York a couple times at first because there was reference to a couple things and I Googled them. Like Bryant Park, like that's not in Chicago, at least that I know of. Like, but there's a Bryant Park in New York City. So but then the more I read it though, the more I was like, okay, this is obviously Chicago. And then there is a reference to the White Sox, I believe. So, but yeah, and like there was, and then I think there's also a mention of like UC, like University of Chicago. So there were a few times that I saw that, but I would say that the city never quite felt like Chicago as somebody who lives here. And like I just don't. I felt like it was a weird choice for him to not say what city it was, because that's not something he typically does, you know? He's usually very big on establishing.
He normally really grounds himself.
Right.
Yeah, he normally really grounds the city. And also, I mean, I went to University of Chicago, and I was like, I had the same kind of like, this doesn't feel like Chicago, but he keeps on dropping hints at Chicago, and like... Yeah, I mean, and again, it was another weird thing about it is because he usually is incredibly forward about where he is taking you,
right?
You know, like he has a whole Americana like love affair, right? He loves to kind of get into like regional shit, and this was very strange. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I'm actually glad you brought
wasn't too well versed with Chicago and got cold feet. I don't really know a lot about Chicago.
It's like when she is going on the train or the bus, it's like he doesn't want us to know where she's going, and then he just runs with that for the whole book, you know.
That's funny. Any other thoughts on structure and format? It's a pretty straightforward one, so, you know. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to a section we like to call Heroes and Villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
In Heroes and Villains, we like to discuss the heroes and villains of these books. And I think we have a pretty clear hero and a pretty clear villain in this one. So let's start with... We've already talked about the characters a lot, which we tend to do in The Hook a lot because King is such a character-focused writer. But I do think we haven't really had a chance to talk in a broad sense about Rosie. I always call her Rose just because of the book. But Rosie Daniels / Rosie McClendon. Is this a character that you found yourself drawn to from the get-go? Did you find her the kind of character that that you wanted to spend the whole book with? What do you guys think?
I love Rose.
Yeah,
I think of Dolores and Jesse and Rose. She's the one I feel like I connect with the most, and I think it's just, I think it's the story that he's telling is one that I really connect with. And I think she is the strongest part of the book and the reason that I will forgive a lot of the other things that are happening. But like, I had so much stuff I wrote down under her section because there's just so many times that she's thinking things that I have thought and she's saying or doing things that I have done. And I really loved her.
Yeah, I've enjoyed her company as well. He does a good job of not condescending to her, which he can do sometimes in his non-college educated, non-middle class characters. He can make them kind of stereotypes and make them less smart, you know?
I feel like he does that with other characters in this book, too.
Yes, he does. Yeah. But he doesn't do that with her. Like, he makes her very smart. Right? Yeah. Like, it's so clear that she is a bright person. And I think, and again, like, there's sort of a part of me that, like, I wish it was almost more about her independent kind of journey away from Norman instead of having this kind of the CD-ROM game be the thing that is her vehicle out of that relationship. Because I think Rosie, probably could have handled Norman herself.
Right.
Like, I have a sense, I mean, that's sort of like, again, I now kind of don't like that I gave this idea of like 2 books, but there's a part of me that like, yeah, like she could have figured something out. She didn't need like literally like Deus Ex Machina, to like come in and take care of this for her.
Well, there's a part in Dr. Sleep when Abra is like trying to become powerful and she visualizes a powerful character. And I feel like that's what King is doing here. He just goes all in on it, But I like what you said about not condescending because I think he could have so easily fallen into the trap of why didn't she leave sooner? And I love that he gives that part of her story a lot of nuance. And that's one of the things that I connected with the most. And I think it's a thing that we don't really hear talked about with nuance as much as I would like.
Yeah, I think what I responded to a lot is the idea of reinvention at the age of 32, which is still obviously very young, but I think even in the early 90s though, like people were getting married a lot younger, and I think especially reading it from today's standards, like I think a lot of people sort of I don't know, don't settle down in that kind of way that she did, until they get into their 30s or mid 30s, So that whole concept, though, of somebody who did settle down when they were that young and, found themselves in a really undesirable relationship, and then also and then sort of finds themselves with no job skills and no no friends in this like unfamiliar city, and then sort of finding their way and building themselves from the ground up is just a really appealing thing to me. And I think it's interesting too, just that whole concept of being at that age and dating again for the first time. And I think a lot of my favorite parts of the book had to do with her meeting Bill and their first dates and sort of the trepidation with which she approached it, and then the ways in which she allowed herself to sort of like sink into that relationship. Like that to me was really powerful. And I guess seeing it of somebody of that age, not that that's old or anything, but like it's not an age that we see a lot in books going through that sort of experience. So
yeah, no, I really dug Rosie. I feel like every time we got to like a Norman bit, I was just, and maybe it was just because I was so disturbed by his stuff, but I was really, really invested in her and her journey when she gets out and going into the town, and just finding the painting and just all of that stuff. All of her bits I really loved, and I thought was fleshed out really well for the most part. And I liked the character she was meeting. I was like, oh, this just felt like. But then it was just like we had to keep pivoting back to this harsh reality of Norman, and I just didn't love that. And then when they went through the painting, I was just like, okay, I don't want this either. Like I just want to. What happens to Rosie and Bill? Like let's go. Let's get back to that motorcycle. But no, I thought I really liked her. I thought she was a really strong character, and it surprised me that more. I mean, I know that I guess a lot of people don't like this book, but I'm surprised that people don't talk about this character more, at least, because I thought she's a pretty strong character.
Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts on Rosie?
I love her. I have the people that I know, because I've heard a lot of people talk about how they love this book, and I feel like this is the reason why. Like, this is the thing to love about this book, is connecting with Rosie and her story. Yeah, I just have so many thoughts about her that I think we've already really touched on, but I just love how her story is presented, and that it's something that we don't see that often. And I love the entire arc of her story. I love that he doesn't cut it off after Norman disappears. I love that it continues, because that's one of the most meaningful parts of the book to me. And so, she feels like a real person in a way that I don't think any other character in the book feels like. It's a very steep drop off after her. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, because it's interesting at the beginning. I mean, we see her go through a lot, but we still know so little about her when she leaves. Like, we don't, like, when I say that, I mean, like, we don't know a lot about her past. We don't know a lot about her hobbies or, like, her job skills or like, the things that she does. And I think part of that is the fact that she's been in this, trapped in this relationship where she hasn't been able to develop herself. And I think that, what I struggled with early on was I was sort of like, well, who is this person, outside of this relationship? And that's the whole point, is like, she doesn't really have an identity outside of that. And that's really the point of the book, is her developing that. And I think that's a really beautiful sort of journey, and something that I think I responded to really strongly. And it's very, I feel similar, Mac. And I remember when I read this when I was young, when we got to the point when she goes inside the painting, I was like, what? Like, I wasn't into it. And then I remember like flipping ahead to see how long that section was, and it was so long, and I was like, oh
shit!
It's like, I genuinely, I was like this, 14-year-old kid being like, I want to see the date. I want to see their date. I don't care about the bowl.
I have one thing that actually sort of might be in structure and format, and it's just a weird little like chronology flaw or like plot flaw, which is when he finally mentions that all of her family is dead. I'm like, oh yeah, why didn't we know that earlier? Like that, because that's a part of the abusive relationship dynamic. It's like, like for me, like part of that was I just didn't tell my family anything. Like I just but it was sort of, and it was like a weird, and then so I felt estranged, and that estranged me from them. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I felt like I couldn't go to them. It's like, well, I'd have to tell him the whole fucking thing. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
and
go ahead.
I was gonna say, and he knew where my family was, so that's another
Yeah, yeah.
element, And I think it's kind of a convenient thing that this isn't an option for her, especially when she leaves, because now that I'm thinking about it, like, there's the time to say it. I don't have anywhere to go because I don't have any family.
I almost admired him when he finally mentions it. I'm like, I almost begrudgingly admire the fact that I didn't think of this. Why haven't you mentioned this earlier?
Yeah.
But that's like because that journey is so cool.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about Norman a little bit. We've talked a lot about him, obviously, but there is some interesting things. And, King, I think it's on page 6, he already starts describing Norman as a bull. He says, there's a narration on that page, there's something inhuman about the way he looks as he comes toward her with his head lowered and his hands hanging at his sides and the long muscles in his thighs flexing. Before the kids called people like her husband fuzz, they had another word for them, and that's the word that comes to her now as he crosses the room with his head down and his hands swinging at the ends of his arms like meat pendulums, because that's what he looks like, a bull. And then later he's described as Grendel in a motorcycle jacket, which I found amusing. But I think I was thinking a lot about Norman sexually. What is this? Not in that way. But I think that, because we talked earlier about this whole concept of him, they say that his dad was abusive, and not only do they say that he was molested by his dad, but they say that Norman preferred being molested to the beatings because it was less painful. And then there are certain moments, though, like when what's her name, Gertie, the big woman, she like calls him, the F word, and he freaks out and he does not like being called that. And I had this moment, I'm like, well, is he supposed to be closeted, especially combined with the scene on the park bench that we discussed earlier, where he's basically giving this guy a hand job before he crushes him, and he sort of obsesses over these things. And then they talk about how he got a hard on when he was basically eating Peter, the guy who helped her in the thing. But I guess, like, for me, and obviously I think it is, and we can talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but like the whole concept of them insinuating that him being molested as a child feeds into his his sadisticness in some way is obviously irresponsible, especially when combined with the Ramon character, which is also depicted in a similar light. But yeah, I guess, like, in the end, I saw him mostly as like someone who is asexual and interested in sex only as a means to attain power, because he gets a hard-on when he's torturing men and women. And he has this whole section where he talks about the women he had slept with since Rose had left, and he says they meant nothing either. What mattered was she had left him. What mattered more was that he hadn't had the slightest clue she meant to do it. And what mattered most was she had taken his bank card. She had only used it once and for a paltry $350, but that wasn't the point. The point was that she had taken what was his, she had forgotten who was the meanest motherfucker in the jungle, and for that she would have to pay. The price would be high too. And then he talks about politically correct marriages never work. And then he also basically says that, I think it was his mother or something drilled into his head, silence gives consent. That was another line. That. Yeah, that was another line that stuck out. And then he also says that he wants to kill Rosie, but he says he says he'll follow her anywhere, and he goes, if it's San Francisco, I'll follow her there. If it's Tokyo, I'll follow her there. And if it's hell, I'll follow her there. Why not? That's where we're going to end up anyway, and probably keeping house together. Like, he basically just wants her to be, his object. And I found that whole kind of dynamic interesting in a lot of ways. So anyways, when I said I was thinking about him from a sexual perspective, it's only because, King confronts us with that a lot. Like, we hear a lot about Norman raping people, we hear a lot about Norman getting hard-ons, we hear a lot about him being molested, and but then in the end it seems like he's like, that's sort of just been a dispassionate aspect of him. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Well, King and sex and Stephen King are rather uncomfortable, relations. And we won't. I don't know if there's going to be a pound cake section in this episode.
Might be a small serving.
I guess there's a little tiny bit, yeah. But that the reason why that section exists is because it doesn't flow, let's say, right? Like his sex scenes are always kind of off, even the violent ones, like, and I feel like that's a real weakness of his. And I wouldn't have been thinking about this except that Jenn mentioned maybe King exploring his own darkness.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not insinuating, I'm just sort of saying that, again, as a person in recovery myself, to whatever extent that modulates what I'm going to say next is that, many people in their addiction misbehave their, sexual impulses, right? Like there's a lot of promiscuity, there's a lot of abuse, both way, abused and abusees. And you find, and a lot of people, they get sober and this stuff kind of falls away. They get, they go through therapy and it's a distant thing from you, but you still did it, right? And there's a part of me that wonders if that's something in King that he may have had. Like, I also am thinking of Dr. Sleep, and the central, sort of, sin that Danny has to confess, which is like having sex with that woman, right?
Yeah.
Well, not having sex with her, but having sex and left her.
Yeah.
But there was a part of me, so again, as a person in recovery, one of my problems with Dr. Sleep is that is so not that bad. Like, of all the shit I've ever heard in AA, like, really,
I feel like we talked about that on the episode when we did our
like, it's
review
just
on
like
that, yeah.
one of the tamest amends I have ever not one of the tamest, but like it's pretty tame. But part of me wonders if there was stuff that King did in his using years that he still kind of thinks about, but it's almost like it happened to another person, but he's still kind of like working through it somehow. I don't know if this is making sense, but
it is.
To me, it would explain some of the almost other, like the weird disconnect all of his sex related writing seems to have. Like he's trying to explore something, but there's just like, I don't know, he just can't quite access it.
It's like he can't kind of let himself go there,
Yeah.
It's like it's so buried that he's got to like put this kind of mythology story on top of it. And that's interesting that you say that, because when I think about the ways that Norman reminds me of my first husband, like he didn't have like a bull mask, but he used a lot, and he was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and like that's what fueled a lot of his rage, and that was what would kind of snap him into that other person that was more like of an animal, and so I see a lot of that with Norman, and I do wonder if it's just kind of King like exploring that side of himself, or maybe like what he doesn't remember.
Well, that's the thing too, is like, when he was using, and I think, what is it, like Cujo? He said he doesn't even remember writing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm like, King, if the stuff that you don't remember in your blackouts was that you wrote a great novel, like,
Yeah.
I think you're okay, but that's probably why he has trouble working through all this other stuff, because it's like, I don't think you did any of this. Or maybe he heard these stories, like maybe if he was going to meetings too, maybe he heard bits and pieces of other people's stories and is kind of trying to work through that stuff as well. And that's why it doesn't come off so right, because you're only hearing one side of the story kind of thing. I don't know. But
is it true though that none of it feels like somebody who's actually had sex, right?
Yes.
Like,
I think
like
that
is
the
thing about all of King's sex stuff is it doesn't feel like it actually happened to the person. The person writing it has no connection to it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's like why we have the pound cake section, is because it almost feels cartoony sometimes. And but I just
I could say one more thing about this. Sorry. Before I forget. I think this dovetails in with Norman's character and with the discomfort about the sexual violence. He says at one point about his interaction with Gert that it was as if she raped him.
Yeah.
Yes, I had that marked because I just wrote "fuck you, Norman" in my notes.
I did. That is also what I was like. Well, fuck you, Stephen King too. Like I don't know if you quite.
Yeah, I was like, no. Like, that's just such a like narcissistic way to look at that.
Yep. Yep.
Especially given everything we know about Norman in this book.
Yeah.
I mean, if you put it in Norman's voice, then I sort of get it, but I kind of also am mad at Stephen King for writing it. Like, I think he might think that's what it feels like. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I was like, nope.
You're wrong. That's bad.
Yeah. And like, if I can be forgiving of that, like I would say it allows you to kind of understand the mindset of someone who could think like that. I think, again, that's me being very, very generous. And that's one of those moments where I feel like he was trying to go there, but it just crossed the line into too far or exploitative. It's like, nope.
Yeah, I almost feel like with Norman, I think it's almost similar to the Greek aspects in that there's a lot of, he's pulling from a lot of different areas and they're not quite cohering. Like when I was rattling off a lot of those, quotes and things of various things I was pulling out about Norman, it just doesn't quite add up to a character, especially one as evil as he is. And I think that's almost like, I almost feel like we got too much background on him if he is supposed to be this almost like supernatural evil that is fueled by hate and violence. I almost feel like we learned a little too much about him because it almost confuses things, you know?
Right. You just you have this incredibly complex character now. You're trying to fit into this like archetype, this god or goddess that, that you're trying to flip now. But it's like, well, no, it doesn't fit into just hate. Like you fleshed out this guy too much now. Like he's got, we know his whole backstory. We know maybe why this happened, why not, or whatever. And I don't know, but Norman he's not a good guy.
No,
I want to put another,
wrap up Norman's character.
Okay, weird sex thing and also overwriting or also maybe foreshadowing, which is he does have, when he's talking about the abuse, the sexual molestation that Norman went through. Did everybody notice that he said that his dad was a cock gobbler?
Yep.
I have that. I have that in Misery, I believe. Yeah.
Yep, me too.
I was like, oh please, like come on.
I know.
Yeah.
And I gave King such a hard time in Insomnia because I was so mad at how forgiving he was for Ed Deepno. And I think that a lot of that had to do with just how shallow Helen was, who is the woman that he abuses in that book. And I feel like he just went all totally the other way. I don't know if anybody else gave him that feedback. But it's like he's almost apologizing for kind of trying to understand a little bit. And I don't mind so much that Norman is such an asshole in this book because there's not one part of me that wants to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
I feel like they do give him just a tiny bit of nuance, but it's such a 90s understanding of what it all is that it just kind of was like, okay, well, there's like B- for effort, maybe.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the opposite of Norman, which is a gentle gentleman named Bill Steiner. Do we think Bill Steiner's a catch?
Yeah.
You like
He's
Bill?
an old smoothie.
I like Bill.
I do too. I think
he's
sweet.
probably like an indie rock guy.
Yeah.
Like probably, hangs out at the lounge acts. I don't know. Like
I'm not a huge fan of Bill. I'm probably on
Really?
that ship by myself, and that's okay. Yeah, and I don't know if this was just me so relating to Rosie and just thinking she's probably not ready to date anybody right now. Because there are certain things that
Rosie, he's wearing a vest. Come on.
Oh my God, I know. Well, there's one moment where he like puts his finger on her lips, and I just wrote in my notes like, "Don't do that." Like it just gave me these cringes. And I think it's interesting they mention codependency, or they don't specifically mention codependency. I don't know who they is that I'm talking about, but Rosie's talking about like needing him and like being terrified of not ever seeing him. And so I do think it's an interesting character to put into the narrative at this point. And I think if I didn't connect so much with Rosie, I'd probably be a lot more forgiving of that. But there's also a moment, one of the things I liked about his character is there's a moment when he triggers her, and it's when he grabs her shoulders and he sees her flinch, and I thought I loved having that because that's like, I'm married to a wonderful guy, but it's like, that's a struggle for us. And we're like dealing with how to like work through that trauma. And on that note, I fucking hate that he gets to forget everything and that she has to carry that burden alone. And it drives me insane because that's one of the biggest things that I've had a problem with is trying to explain to someone else how it feels, and like he has that.
Yeah, that's a weird part too, because it's not his doing either, it's like
right, exactly.
She's letting him off the hook, but then she's got to deal with all this and then also deal with him not understanding what the hell she's dealing with.
Right.
It's like why would you do that? Like he I don't think he would have lost it. I think he's pretty with
probably
it.
Handle it. Mm-hmm.
It's always presented like it's a gift to him to be able to forget,
Right.
and that she's doing it because he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle the truth.
Right.
Right. I mean, I guess what I'll say about what I like about Bill is that he's clearly like kind of an anti-hipster, and that he doesn't have sex with her on their date. I loved that. And I love the idea of also the scene where he brings her all that food.
Yeah.
And
that's a cute
they laugh. And it's a very cute scene, and I love that she laughs about it and he laughs. It felt all of that felt really like I can see this date happening, and let's say again, King has some, he doesn't always hit a home run when it comes to like his, depictions of romance, right? And he is a little bit cringy. I thought it was funny that he was like kind of a nerd who rode a Harley. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's King.
But yeah, that is King. You're right. Like I did realize that was who he is.
He had just done his motorcycle tour to promote Insomnia, so I think he had hogs on his mind.
Yeah.
His editor's like, we can't have the character named Steven. We're changing it to Bill.
Motorcycles are a big part of desperation as well, so get ready.
Oh, that's right.
No, I actually, Jen, what you said, I mean, I sort of just accepted it as well, it's a necessary part of the story. But when she started like dating him, I was just like, you just need to be single for a while.
Right.
Because like, I don't know. I've always been such a huge proponent of that because like, I basically, I'll just say it like worked for me. Like I was in a really, when I was like 21, I was engaged to, and I was very, very Christian, and it was it was like such an intense process. Like I wouldn't call it, like a negative one necessarily, but it was one where I sort of had to rediscover myself because like when the relationship ended, like my faith ended, and so I sort of had to like. I think that's why I like these stories about like reinventing yourself like at a certain age and like losing all the things you thought you believed in, because I went through something somewhat similar and I moved to a city where I didn't know people to go to school, and I was basically like, okay, time to figure this out on my own. And the first thing, of course, I did was seriously start dating someone, like right out of my long-term relationship. And it was such a nightmare. Like it was one of the worst experiences because I wasn't ready, and then she, wasn't ready. It was just very unpleasant. So I don't know, like whenever I talk to people who have been in long-term relationships and they're freshly out of them, if they want my advice is always, I think it's good to just be single for a while. But again, at the same time, I understand that this is pretty much for the sake of the story, and overall, I do think that the scenes, like, I find it hard sometimes to connect with a romantic couple, and like especially when it moves at such a fast pace, because these people basically love each other after one date. So it's like, stuff like that I always struggle with. But I will say I mostly bought it in this because I think I was so endeared to her character, and I felt like I liked the way for the most part that he was treating her, and and so overall I was able to get myself on that level. So, and he's also such like the polar opposite of Norman that I think is it makes you root for him a little bit more too. So
and also she gets to rescue. I mean, like also he's not the hero, right? Like that's another thing I liked about it is that he doesn't rescue her. He doesn't
do anything.
She rescues him,
she saves him,
and yet there's and I just I don't know, and I guess there's a part of me, and I think this is probably what King was going for, is that there's the like let her have a little fun,
right?
Like let her have like someone who adores her, I don't know. Like, I agree. Like, there's also, not to get too but you're not supposed to date your first year sober, and there is kind of like a very similar, like, you are still figuring shit out. Any relationship you get into at this point is probably not going to be with like who you really are,
right?
Like,
or who you're going to end up with,
yeah. So yes, she would have if I was her sponsor. Really shut that down.
All that to say, I do think he's a good partner for her, and as much as like, I think it's more the timing of the relationship that I kind of bump against. But I do like, and I like the continuation of their story. You know, I think is sweet.
Any other characters you guys want to talk about? I mean, those are kind of the core trio, but we do meet a lot of other women, specifically at the women's shelter that Rosie goes and stays at. Are there any characters that maybe leapt out to you as somebody you enjoyed, or even somebody you thought, I hate this character, I wish they would go away?
I don't know if there's necessarily one character, but I do not like the way that he writes about most of the other women in the book. I feel like Pam, I feel like he rates her as kind of stupid. Anna, I feel like he writes her as vain. I think
he definitely writes her as vain.
Yeah, and there's moments
all kind of one note
where,
too.
Exactly, yeah, and even Gert, like I have a lot of problems with the way he describes her physically, and I feel like she's just such a flat character. And there's a moment where it feels like he's blaming Pamela and Anna for their own deaths. Like her body wasn't discovered because she liked her privacy too much, or like, oh, silly girl, she ran into the door herself. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, and really contrasted with the way he wrote Rose, which I think is, well, that was one of the things I was talking about, is she's the only character, or at least female character, that I feel like has nuance.
I liked Gert, but the physical description of her was terrible.
Well, that's whenever King writes overweight characters, he can't slow down, he's so obsessed with chronicling that, and that's something we've talked about a lot in previous episodes, specifically in Thinner. But it's the way he writes overweight people, he can't rein himself in, So
I will say this is one of the rare overweight characters. I even want to say overweight, right? This is one of the rare physically large characters
who can handle herself.
Isn't evil.
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah,
yeah, she's very capable.
I was expecting. Yeah, I thought for sure the way that he was writing the character and describing them, I thought, oh, here we go. But then it's she's very
yeah, I do.
She's a strong character that beats the shit out of Norman, and I was like, "Oh, this is not going the way I thought this character was going to go."
I thought I could do without the pissing on him. To be perfect.
Yeah, that was really gratuitous. It was fun. Yeah. It was. I remember I liked it. I remember that specifically, and I loved it when I was a kid. When I was 14, I thought that was great because pissing on a bad person is hilarious. But now it's just kind of it's gratuitous, and it's kind of it just kind of blew in ways that you don't need, So
yeah,
I read that review, Randall.
Wait, what review?
I said I read that review where it said, King wrote this for a 14-year-old or something.
He wrote it for me as a 14-year-old.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
no one else really stood out to me.
I thought Anna was at least somewhat interesting. I liked. I liked the tone of her voice, basically, the way he wrote her voice, and the way that but at the same time it almost felt like he was I don't know, that he met with someone who was that, and then he sort of tried to copy the person that he met onto this character, because a lot of that language, it's almost it almost feels like a template in some way, where it's this kind of this is how somebody who started in a woman's shelter would talk, and this is their philosophy and everything. And sometimes it almost felt like he was reiterating rather than writing a fully fleshed out character. And I think maybe his way of fleshing out that character was to give her sort of the more unsavory, vain qualities. But I do think I agree with you. He sort of leaned into it a little bit too hard, because it's I don't need this character to have that unlikable quality, I don't need this character to be vain. That doesn't add anything to the story for me,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that she's not perfect.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fun. That's good. I will say, I'm curious, I've spent a little time doing volunteer work around women's issues and stuff. I won't say I'm an expert, but I'm curious if he's actually met very many people that do that work, because it didn't feel it felt like what you would pick up from ABC specials or something.
Sure.
It felt really unnuanced. And I also know from reading on writing, doesn't he basically say don't do research until after you've written?
Oof,
right?
I don't remember
he's
that.
Write your Yeah, he talks about writing from a Buick 8 and how he didn't know anything about cops or like troopers, I guess, really specifically state troopers when he started writing it. And he didn't go do research or do any ride-alongs until after like he'd written the rough draft. And then he went and like filled in stuff. And his what he says is I kind of like it, but he said like I don't need to know that much about them to be able to write a story about them. And I'm like, well,
maybe.
I mean,
I mean, I can see getting hung up on like the particulars of like, you know, a ride along, but like, yeah, that's interesting that he said that because yeah.
Well, and like when I think about, because that was something that I wondered when I read Gerald's Game, because like I think he gets the thought processes so like dead on there, and I wondered, had he talked to survivors and had he tried to kind of understand, and I feel like maybe here he talked to one who had seen those specials. Because I agree, there's a lot that I really like about the Daughters and Sisters shelter, although I have some thoughts about that name too. But there's like he's writing this depth and kind of, well, I don't know how deep it goes, but then there's the section where he's talking about the bumper stickers, and it's just like every cliche he can think of. And it almost feels like that was his like backlash to having to try to kind of expand his mind in this way, which is, I think, maybe something that a lot of people are dealing with right now, trying to adjust like to this woke culture. I don't know if that's a fair way to say it, but it's like he's frustrated with having to understand that, and so then he writes this whole like rage against bumper sticker slogan kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I just remember Norman laughing at the way he laughs at like the sticker that says "I respect women." It's just kind of like so comically evil. Like,
I know.
He's like, right. I respect women. No, I don't.
They'll never know because the bumper
and there's
sticker.
One of those stickers that like makes no sense or something. Like I won't go back now. I want to go back and look at it. But I do remember thinking that his disguise was kind of evil genius. Like, I mean, when he thought of that, and when like sort of the plan started to come together, I was kind of ready for showdown at whatever the pier
at Navy Pier.
Yeah, Navy Pier. Yeah,
not Navy Pier.
We won't call Navy Pier. And I was a little disappointed. Like I thought it was going to be like a huge, like one of his, like Grand Guignol kind of scenes where like everybody gets killed and there's blood everywhere. Like the kind of cemetery, like the kind of stuff that's almost kind of fun, right? Like it's comic violence, and then it turns into what is a pretty good fight scene, I guess, except for the peeing. And actually, that's like probably the biggest cemetery part for me, is that setup for the menace of when he's like trying to figure out who to attack.
Oh yeah, like when he has
I
Cynthia,
found that really creepy.
Yeah,
I don't know if I have actually any great quotes from it, but I remember feeling like, anyway.
Yeah. Well, before we head to the cemetery, I think that we should air our grievances in a little section we call Misery.
She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away! Slipped away! She didn't just slip away! You did it! 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 You murdered my misery!
Annie!
Welcome to Misery. This is the section of the pod where we talk about the stuff we just really kind of hated. Or maybe stuff that we just thought was funny in a very silly way. I will start with, on page 90, when she's in the thrift store, I just thought this sentence was so funny and such like an old man line. She sees some boom boxes, stereos, and she goes, there seem to be a great many of those oversized multifunction sound systems that were called quote unquote boom boxes on the TV shows.
This is how humans talk.
I'm like, did a 90-year-old person write that line? Like, come on.
It's the rapper for the kids.
Exactly.
Yes, the DJ rapper.
That's you, Mac.
I know.
Did you guys have any miseries that you have handy? Anything that made you particularly grossed?
Yeah.
Mac, let's start with you.
Yeah, page 88. This is one of your favorites, Randall. But now blood was brightly visible in the creases of his closed fist.
Yes.
You gripped his hand so hard that it's bleeding.
We've already said, does that happen?
It happens twice.
Oh.
And I had that in King's Dominion because it's such a king.
Oh, you think he's channeling?
I don't know. I have, but there are two different times when people dig their nails into their palms so hard that there's blood crescents, which I just think is such a funny. I remember noticing it when I was young, and it is in even more books than I realized, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah.
Jen,
Betty
did you have
does
any
it on
miseries?
Riverdale.
Oh, really?
She does, yeah. That's when she goes dark, Betty. That's a little silly. Yeah, I had some. First of all, the barbershop is named Cut Me Some Slack, which is just the stupidest, caricature of a... Yeah, and also, on page 52, when he's talking about the woman who has I love my honey misspelled, tattooed on her hand. I thought that was silly. But then I had a lot of, I don't know if we want to go here yet, but I had a lot of really uncomfortable misery stuff with just basically anytime we were in his head, I was like, nope, this is terrible.
Yeah, there's plenty of them. I had one with Norman just being like, the DA was probably reaching heights of orgasm unmatched since cornholing his Cocker Spaniel back in junior high school. I'm like, what is that sentence?
There's so much of that.
Yeah.
One of the other ones I had is when Bill is yelling in his dream. I'm like, nobody says things in dreams like that. He's like, she won't stop. She'll kill anyone she sees. Make him stop. It's like, that's not what you do when you wake up for a dream.
What do you have, Ana?
I have a few. One of them is when he talks about inserting the card when he gets it back from her.
Yeah.
Like that. Also biting his own finger, and that's not the only thing he'd bitten off and swallowed.
Ugh.
And then the link. Well, and then there's the whole park bench,
God.
And then there's on page 325 in my edition. He drew in another deep breath, drew it all the way down to the floor of his lungs, and now recognized the smell in here for what it was. Not the smell of dust, but the smell of women. Women who had been long entrenched with their own kind. Women who had knitted themselves into a communal shroud of self-righteousness in an effort to block out the real world. It was the smell of blood and douche and sachet and hairspray and roll-on deodorant and perfumes with fuck-me names like My Sin and White Shoulders and Obsession. It was the vegetable smell of what they like to eat and the fruity smell of the teas they like to drink. The smell that was not dust but something like yeast, a fermentation, and it produced a smell cleaning could never remove. The smell of women without men. All at once, that smell was filling his nose, filling his throat, filling his heart, gagging him, making him feel faint, almost suffocating him.
Too much.
We got him, girl.
Word processor.
I know. Do you think he wrote that and was like, yes,
that's good.
Right?
He's like,
I got women.
I think he rose his fists in the air and then walked out of the room.
Just slams his word processor on the floor.
He was very into severed heads these days. There's a scene in Insomnia where a character's head gets severed and flies across 10 rows, and it's so silly. And then the way that they had to describe how Rosie's dad's head was severed and found 30 yards from the crash when he died, with the mouth open and a generous splash of crow shit in one eye. I'm like, come on. I mean,
trying to up his severed head game every
I
time.
know.
Oh, now it was 40 yards away.
That was just a bit much. And then we have a laugh till you cry alert, which is another ongoing thing. King loves to have his characters laugh uncontrollably until they're doubled over on the ground with tears flying from their eyes. There was a couple in here, but page 203, Rosie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again without the slightest idea of what she intended to say. It turned out to be nothing. What came out instead of words was laughter. She laughed until she cried, and before she was done, Pam had joined in. I've never laughed till I cried with multiple people for that long. Although I will say we made fun of it once, and one of our listeners said that he did do that. So I will not say that. I will not.
Wait, have you've never laughed till you cried?
I have, but not in the way that where King characters do it, where they fall on the ground and are clutching their stomachs and laughter is exploding out of their heads. It's so.
See, I've laughed.
That's happened to me before.
I mean, I've laughed so hard that I mean, the laughter stopped. Like, I couldn't make noise.
Okay.
Like,
yes, I've done that.
And then I started. I was like, tears were coming out of my eyes because it was like, you know, I mean, that actually happened somewhat recently, to believe it or not.
Would you say it happens often?
You're right.
Because it happens
like
in
maybe
every...
like
Okay, maybe not often, yeah.
Like maybe like every few years.
Okay,
like
yeah.
every decade.
Yeah. No, I hear that. No, I always find those moments funny.
Yeah, but it is a trope for him, and I also just love. I just want to say one more. I love that you put the fingernail thing in King's Dominion, and I'm gonna do that from now on whenever I see it. It's gonna be like, so this is a thread. This is a meaning.
That's more of room 237.
Oh, Ka. We didn't mention Ka.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to Ka.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll get to
sorry.
But page 370, Randall.
Yeah.
Sorry, when it says, "She who steals her husband's bank card shall not be suffered to live," is inscribed on the temple, and I thought, what a lame fucking thing to be on the temple. Like, ugh. God,
it's just like she who steals her husband's blank, and then you have to just like put a piece of paper over it to fill in.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is something that King does a lot in his modern novels. This is one of the first times I feel like, although I think he did it in Insomnia as well. I think we talked about it, where he just like he mentions an author he likes, and then we'll have a character be like, "Oh, you know, that's a pretty great author," and it's like a real one, you know. And and he does it in here on page 208, a line that like made me laugh so hard. She picked the bowl up and turned it over, holding the circular over the top so the cricket couldn't escape before she was ready for it to. It jumped energetically up and down meanwhile, its armored back ticking off a picture of the new John Grisham novel, which could be purchased at Walmart for only $16 plus tax.
Oh my God.
What are you doing?
Shameless plug. Plugging his friend, you know?
I know, but it's like in The Outsider, there's like the most absurd one, because there's like, they're talking about the author Harlan Coben, who's great, but like King is this like this character mentions Harlan Coben, and then later this guy goes, he couldn't wait to read the new Harlan Coben, which was sure to be a real barn burner or something like that. Any other miseries that you guys have?
It's not necessarily a misery, but I will say, along with the joke that's so funny that you laugh, I don't necessarily think I have a problem with them laughing that hard. I think it's just that it's never that funny what they're laughing at.
Yes.
That's a good
that's what made you cry?
And then my number one misery of the whole book was Norman doing his like Gert Gert Bobert, like Banana Fana.
Yes.
Because he did that with like 3 characters, and that is so stupid. And this factors into one of my big complaints with King, which I've talked about in previous episodes, which is like, and he's not a ghost, but it's like wisecracking ghosts. Like, I do not like malevolent entities that reference like pop culture.
that have a good time.
That have a good time. I just want them to be evil. I do not want them to sing songs.
Like the Zebul who is tanned, rested, and ready.
Yes, not interested. Like, just be evil.
Oh,
please.
you know, another thing I didn't love is the I'm really rosy real thing they keep bringing up. I don't like that trope. Like,
it mentions so many times,
we got it. We don't... Yeah, they mention it so many times. And I'm like, this just pulls me right out of it.
Yeah.
Even it's a great scene. As soon as she says that, I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to do with this, but this is not going to take off. People aren't going to be saying this at home.
It's not going to take off.
I have that in one of my word processor sections, and I'll just skip it when I get there.
Oh, I mean...
Speaking of WordPresser of the gods, let's head over there right now.
And we're going to make a new rule. Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, whether the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. Now, do you think you can handle that?
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
Welcome to Word Processor of the Gods. This is the section of the podcast where we talk about writing we did like, sections we think are well written, sections we find emotionally resonant. Jen, do you want to kick us off with one?
Yeah, I've got a lot. One of the things that I loved about this book is the climax, and I won't read the whole thing, but I love, as silly as I feel like it takes to get there. Like, I don't necessarily feel like it all works. Like, I love the moment where he is confronted with all of the pain and the rage that he has caused, and he has to really absorb that, because I think that's my biggest problem with Norman and men like Norman in general, is they never see anything outside of themselves. And when he actually has to face that, it's really satisfying. And there's a sentence on page 438 where he says, where Norman finally learned what it was like to be the bitten instead of the biter. And I just loved that.
Yeah.
But I also had on 167, I turned right to it. When she's talking to Bill, and this is one of the things that I feel like really just kind of got in, it was like, oh, that's how I think. He said, when she's talking about what she wants to say to Bill, I'd love that, but I think I'm afraid of what I might find out later on when the ride was over. The Norman inside my head was right all along about the things you really want. What scares me the most is having to investigate the most basic premise of my husband's life. The one thing he never said out loud because he never had to, that the way he treated me was perfectly okay, perfectly normal. It's not pain I'm afraid of. I know about pain. What I'm afraid of is the end of this small, sweet dream. I've had so few of them, you see. And I think that's kind of a big part of recovery, is like just learning to trust somebody else and kind of extending that that hope that I think he really kind of captured there.
Yeah, I love that. Mac, what do you have?
I honestly don't know where I had this. I wrote this stuff down and I cannot find it. So come back to me.
You're fired off the podcast.
Oh, hey, I've got plenty to make up for it.
Yeah, let's just keep going back to Jen, because
I will say I do think the writing is really, like, there are moments of like really beautiful writing in this that I really enjoyed.
I didn't have like a ton. I mean, I feel like some of the writing, the turns of phrase, like for me, like King often has like stuff where he just really nails like a moment or a feeling, and that's what I didn't have as much of in this book. And that's sort of also where I feel like he was straining more, like those easy turns of phrases that he sometimes comes up with. I literally have one thing that stopped me in my tracks, though, and I was like, oh wow, that is good. Which is when she actually goes to get the baby in the maze, which again, I did not enjoy most of this part of the book, but when she says, she folded back, she's actually giving the baby to Wendy Dorcas. She folded back the blanket and looked at the body, which was naked and as female as her own. That was where the resemblance ended, however. There were no scars on the child, no marks that looked like the fading teeth of old traps. Which, that phrase, the fading teeth of old traps, like, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I have a small moment. It's early in the book, and it's not like a groundbreaking piece of writing or anything, but it just sort of like resonated with me, and all it is a description of being in that sort of place between sleep and awake, especially when you're feeling, relatively unmoored or nervous or something. But she's on the bus, and it says, and so thinking, she slipped not into sleep, but into that umbilical cord which connects sleeping and waking. Here she moved slowly back and forth like a bubble, faintly aware of the diesel engine's steady hum, the sound of the tires on the pavement, of a kid 4 or 5 rows up asking his mother when they were going to get to Aunt Norma's. But she was also aware that she had come untethered from herself, and that her mind had opened like a flower, a rose, of course, opened as it does only when one is in neither one place nor the other. I just love that because I feel like I've been in that place a lot, and it's, I don't know, it's always kind of an uneasy feeling for me, but I don't know, just hearing it articulated in that way. And there was another one similar that it was just like the description of a sensation, and it's when Norman is describing a migraine he's having, and I just weirdly found it I don't know, weirdly, like it just hit me like a ton of bricks. But as he lay in bed looking up at the ceiling, his eyes ran and his nose leaked, and he could see funny, bright zigzag patterns pulsing around the edges of things. The pain had reached the point where it felt like there was some horrible fetus in the middle of his head trying to be born. The point where there was nothing to do but hunker down and wait for it to be over. And the way you did that was by getting through the moments one at a time, going from one to the next the way a person might use stepping stones to cross a stream. And I don't suffer from migraines or anything, but I've had like that kind of pain before. And I just found that, even though it was coming from Norman, it was a moment where I very much related to that. What's another one you have, Jen?
Well, I have the moment where she is walking out the door. And I will say also, Blair Brown does a fantastic job of reading the Rose parts, and she just has such a beautiful kind of almost ASMR voice, which is partly why I think I like so many of these passages. She says, but she stayed where she was a moment longer, like an animal which had been kept in a cage so long it cannot believe in freedom even when it is offered. She reached behind her and touched the knob of the door that led to her cage. No more, she whispered. She tucked her purse under one arm and took her first dozen steps into the fog bank, which was now her future. And I don't know if that's so much like really strong writing. I think it just really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. And I have two more, if that's okay.
Yeah, I've got one more too. So.
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
I've got a couple. Yeah.
Okay. Well, mine are the very last pages, so if you guys want to do yours.
What do you have, Mac?
Well, I can't find this, but I know there was two moments where there's one that I also had in Cemetery where it was just at the very beginning after that first sequence where he just simply writes, Rosie McClendon Daniels slept within her husband's madness for 9 more years. And I think that
I had that
he has these kickers that I haven't seen in the last few novels that I've read, but there's just kind of like those little poignant ends to that like chapter where you're just like, fuck, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then also that's the sequence where all of the women kind of find themselves gathered looking at the painting, but no one can really touch on why they're looking at it, you know? Mm-hmm. There was a piece there, and I can't find it right now. But
it's funny you bring that up because that's actually one of mine, but it's not really a piece of prose. It just resonated with me. Like the line I wrote down was, Anna surprised her and eased her considerably by smiling and nodding. Yes, that's really all art is about, I think, and not just pictures. It's the same with books and stories and scripture and even castles in the sand. Some things call to us, that's all. It's as if people who made them were speaking inside our heads. And she goes, but this particular painting, is it beautiful to you, Rosie? And that resonated for me, and not just in the broad sense, which is... that art is subjective, but also like I have a tattoo of a whale on my arm, and it's from a book, a Jonah and the Whale children's book. And it wasn't a children's book I had when I was young. The summer that my engagement ended when I was young, I was working at a grocery store, and there was this like bin of bargain bin books, and every day I walked by it and there was this Jonah and the Whale book on top, and I always thought I had no money, but I was just like, every now and then I was like, oh, I should buy that. And it was mainly, I just couldn't really put my finger on why. I just loved it. And at the time I was still Christian, but sort of like losing faith a little bit. And the drawing of the whale on the front of it just sort of represented to me everything that I found comforting and innocent, like just the general concept of like, when you like faith being something where you can believe a whale swallowed a person and they lived, and that sort of suspension of disbelief, that fantasy quality, and believing that and having faith in that is a really beautiful concept to me. Like, in like the woo-woo kind of way of religion, and at that time that was the kind of feeling I wanted to grasp again, because I was mired in a lot of the darker parts of it, and so I ended up on my last day of work, I bought that book, and then I took it, and I've always loved it, and I kept it, and then one day I just took it into a tattoo shop, like without even really thinking about it, and I was like, I want this in my arm, and then they put it together, and then within a couple days it was on my arm, and I love it to this day. And so it's like, and it represents that for me, but it's like this, little children's book that for the whole summer nobody bought it, and I'm so glad I did. And it was $7 or something, but that was something that just like called to me, and now it's like literally inked on my arm, and I think it's a sweet thing. So I don't know. So there's that. And then I have a really gross one. It might be better for the cemetery, but I thought the writing was actually good as well. And it's 459, and it's when Rose and Steiner and Norman are fighting in the hallway, and it's dark out, and Rose like grabs his jaw and like dislocates it.
Yeah.
I loved that because I feel like I haven't seen that in anything before. And so there was just a couple like little parts of it. Instead of trying to pull free of his grinding, baleful teeth, she folded her fingers at the second knuckle, pressing the pads of her fingers against the gum line inside his front teeth. Then she set the heel of her preternaturally strong left hand against his chin and pulled. There was a strange creaking sensation under her hand, the sound of a board under a man or woman's knee might make just before it snapped. She felt Norman jerk, heard him make a hollow interrogative sound which seemed to consist solely of vowels. Arr! And then his lower face slid forward like a bureau drawer, coming dislocated from the hinges of his jaw. I love that. And then later, like a couple pages later, Norman is like reckoning with that injury, and he goes, his jaw had replaced his nose as the center of pain now, just as his nose had replaced his jammed knee and his outrage. I also thought outraged balls was funny. But what had she done to him? The lower half of his face felt not just torn open, but extended somehow. His teeth seemed to be satellites floating somewhere out beyond the end of his nose. I was reading that going like, oh my God. Because that's like, that's the kind of injury that makes me scream a little bit. So anyways, I put that under word processor just because I thought the writing was especially good. But Mac, did you say you had one more?
No. I mean, I had another, but I can't find it.
Well, let's
maybe Jen will touch on it.
Yeah, let's pivot over to Jen then.
Well, it's funny because I actually had the one about the jaw, and I was like, nah, I think Randall will get that one.
And I did.
And you did, yeah. The two that I had are on the very end, 470. My copy has terrible page numbers, so I think it's 476. The first one is when she is planting the seeds, trembling, beginning to cry, partly because the scraps of her old hurt life made her so sad, and partly because she is so afraid that the new one was in danger. And I just loved the way that he phrased that. And then the last one that I had was on the very last page. Now it is enough simply to come here and to hold her clear, unblemished hands in her lap and look at the tree of her rage and the hard splashes of rose madder that will become in later years the numb, sweet fruit of death. And then skipping a little rosy reel, all accounts balance. As the woman in the Zap might have said, she has reached safe harbor, and on those spring mornings near the lake, sitting in the overgrown, silent clearing, which has never changed over all the years, it is very like a picture that way, the sort of humdrum painting one might find in an old curio shop or a pawn and loan. Her legs folded beneath her, she sometimes feels a gratitude so full that she thinks her heart can hold no more, ever. It is this gratitude that makes her sing. She must sing. There is no other choice. I just thought that was such a perfect way to end her story.
Yeah, that's lovely. All right. I think it is time for us to walk amongst the gravestones.
What's the bottom of the truth?
Well, sometimes that is better. The person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond that cemetery ain't human at all.
Welcome to the cemetery. This is the part of the podcast where we talk about what terrified us and scared us into the night. Again, we discussed that this section was a little bit tougher to sort of round out when we're dealing with the specifics of this book, but I think there's a few that we probably have that factor into the old King horror. Does anybody want to start?
Yeah, the coat hook through the eye.
Yeah.
Look, eye stuff for me, and then the jaw thing. I mean, you stole the jaw thing. I had that. I had that mentioned like multiple times on multiple pages. I was just like, oh, the jaw again. But yeah, that coat hook through the eye was like, that's like one of my fears. Is like tripping in someone's home and they have a coat hook and,
or anything sharp at eye level.
That scared the hell out of me.
How about you, Ana?
You know, for all the trouble we were giving King for the Zebul.
Yeah.
Something that I found, I don't know if I have cemetery stuff that's truly like the usual kind of cemetery for the reasons that we already kind of discussed. But I had stuff that kind of gave me the creepy crawlies, I would say. Mm-hmm. And so speaking of the bull, like the bull mask did kind of creep me out. And actually the scene where he is in the car shirtless with blood on him and the yuppie pulls up next to him and he gets the bull mask and like makes the bull mask sing or whatever.
Yep, I have that in mind.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there was just like, it was unhinged without getting inside Norman's head.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and it was a show not tell of like how far he's gone. And I think I really appreciated that. And then the final scene of Norman and Rose Matter, I actually kind of read through that really quickly because it was like so like, ugh. And like that. I almost didn't want to know what she looked like, right?
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah, the spider face thing.
Yeah, that really. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Similarly,
I mean, I'm not even
that scene with Norman. I kind of loved it. Like there was a very Lovecraftian sort of element to that, and just the sense of like when I'm trying to find the actual line where it says it, but basically it's like right before the final parts of his mind like completely snapped, like he kind of took all this in, and those kind of lines are always very interesting to me. Just the general sense of like somebody's madness, like they stare into something and it completely obliterates whatever sense of self that they still had in there, like the idea of like one's brain exploding. Like that's what I enjoyed about that section.
I would also say when Norman tries to correct his broken jaw, that is just, and then he ends up he puts the mask on to kind of hold it in place.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh,
it's so nasty. I'll read this section. Ana, you mentioned that earlier. The guy he calls Thumper, whose name is Peter. When he kills him, it goes very soft focus, but I still found this little section to be very, very chilling. But in the end, Slowick helped quite a bit. By then, they were down in the cellar because Norman had begun to bite, and not even the TV turned all the way to top volume would have completely stifled the man's screams. But screams or no screams, he helped quite a bit. When the festivities were over, Norman found the garbage bags under the sink. Into one of these, he put the oven gloves and his own shirt, which could not now be worn in public. And then I'll jump forward a little bit. Norman laid on the bed, then went into Thumper's bathroom and turned on his shower. When he waited for the water to run hot, he looked in Thumper's medicine cabinet, found a bottle of Advil, and took 4. His teeth hurt and his jaws ached. The entire lower half of his face was covered with blood and hair and little tags of skin. Like, that's just such a nasty little whole thing. And just the idea of his teeth hurting and his jaws aching. For some reason, I actually remember that from my previous read as well. That general idea of, like, he ate so hard he was in pain. So.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any other cemeteries?
I kind of did along those lines. It was the biting thing, and that is something that has stuck with me since previous reads. And I think I remembered it I remembered Anna's death to be a lot more gruesome than it is. And I don't know if this is totally cemetery, but I don't know where else to talk about it. The other reason that I love this book, or that I'm so grateful that this book exists, is because it helped me pull up a memory, like a very specific memory. Because a lot of times, like what I would do is I would say, okay, well, it wasn't that bad because he never did this and he never did that. And I was reading this and I was like, well, he never bit me, so it can't be that bad. And then I was thinking, oh, wait. Yes, he did. Oof. And I went downstairs and I was like, looked at my face in the mirror and I noticed that I have a tiny little scar on my cheek. And for years I had told myself that was sun damage from like a really bad sunburn. And then I just remembered what it actually was. And it just, I don't know if I would have uncovered that memory, or I don't know what else it would have taken to get that memory up for me. So as much as that, it terrified me, and it just like, reading all of those scenes was like very triggering, but I mean, I'm glad that it helped me process it, and I think that's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Wow. I've got one last one, and it kind of falls into a theme of my cemeteries, I think, which is essentially art pieces or sacred figures basically debasing themselves in like coming to life and debasing themselves in a very sort of perverse way. There was I wasn't particularly freaked out by any of the stuff that was happening like in the temple, like with the various statues, but there was one bit that really freaked me out, which was in the latter half of the book when she was basically running from Norman. Then the stone boy moved then. Its arms came down and seized Rosie's right wrist. Rosie screamed and beat fruitlessly against its two-handed grip. The stone boy was grinning, and as Norman watched, it stuck out its marble tongue and waggled it at Rosie suggestively. And that, the idea of like the statue wagging its tongue at her, it reminds me of this scene in It where a painting of Jesus comes to life and basically makes all these like sexual gestures at Beverly. And it's always been a very, very, that's like, you know, as somebody, especially with a religious background, it's just something that really disturbs me. And I think that extends to sort of art pieces or, you know, statues, monuments, things like that. That idea of this, you know, almost mythic, thing coming to life and doing that. It's just a very perverse sort of thing that I think always makes me very uncomfortable. So I read that and I was like, oh yeah, that's of a piece. But I think it's time, now that we've wandered around the cemetery a little bit, to have, there's probably not too much, but we can at least give ourselves a little serving of pound cake.
After all you've been taught, everyone isn't bad, Mama. Everything isn't a sin. Come to your closet and pray. Ask to be forgiven. He's a nice boy, Mom. You like him. You really like him, Mama.
Welcome to Pound Cake. This is where we discuss the stuff that maybe made us, I don't know, blush in ways that perhaps we weren't meant to. Did you guys have any pound cake you wanted to share?
Yeah.
Bring it, Mac.
A couple. Just the idea of whenever Rosie's hot button's going to be pressed. He mentions that hot button a couple times, and I was always like, "Ooh, like we've got the hot button. Like this is something like this is a heated moment here." You know, I just thought that was fun, and just the whole. It's a disturbing moment, but just the, hey, baby, let's put all four on the floor. Like, I've never heard that phrase before. It was just like it made me laugh, but it's such a disturbing moment where this guy's hassling her, and it's like, ugh. But, yeah, I didn't really have anything other than the hot button. I was hoping for more pound cake, and it was just such a horrifying novel in the sense of what's actually happening. It was hard to kind of pull funny moments out of those situations,
I'll say that there was... similar to the obsession with Gert's weight and general size, I will say that there was a couple sections that described her breasts that I thought were a little bit much, as Stephen tends to go when he talks about breasts. He says, her breasts rose and subsided like ocean waves beneath the white t-shirt she was wearing. And then later he says, the shirt slid up to reveal the largest bra Rosie had ever seen. The beige Lycra cups look like World War I artillery shells.
I think I glazed through that part.
How? It was so
I have
bland.
I have one because it actually, I almost used the first part for word processor of the gods, and then he just ruined it. Because this was sort of like with Jen, this is something I really like, again, sort of getting, when coming back into relationships after having been in a really terrible one. She's out with Bill at Pop's kitchen.
Yeah.
Their first date, and he says, "Are you okay?" No, she wasn't okay. She knew the voice in her head was a lying voice, one which came from a part of her that was still blighted by Norman's poison. But what she knew and what she felt were very different things. She couldn't sit in the midst of all these people, that was all, smelling their soaps and colognes and shampoos, listening to the bright interweavings of their chatter. She couldn't deal with the waiter who would come bending into her space with a list of specials, and some perhaps in a foreign language. That's a little weird. But most of all, she couldn't deal with Bill Steiner, talking to him, answering his questions, all the time wondering how his hair would feel under her palm. Mm-hmm. Like, ooh. The image that gives, right?
Yeah.
Of just like palming someone's hair. Like, what? Yeah. Like, that first part is really good. Like, I actually remember that idea is specifically of sitting on a date and being able to smell like everyone else is also kind of out on a date, and they all are at their best. And here I am, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. You know?
Yeah, I love that.
But then, putting her palm on his hair.
Do you guys have any others? I've got one last one here.
I've got one that's kind of along those lines of like almost got there and then kind of shit the bed a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's where she and Bill are finally having sex. Well, not finally, after a week or two, they're having sex. And she said she looked up at Bill. He was looking down at her, his eyes wide and hazy with pleasure. His, she found, were hers, and she let herself go where he was taking her, and they stayed where they were for quite some time. Brave little soldiers voyaging as in the little ship of her bed. I was like, what?
Wait, where did this go?
Really bizarre ending there.
I know.
What does he think?
I was like,
sex
is that where Bill's taking you?
I mean, he's got 3 kids is the thing.
I'll say that, okay, this is my last one, is I just think this is funny because Norman is literally in a mythical world. He has walked through a painting, and he's wearing a bull mask that is slowly turning into his own head, and he still makes a crack about how the Greek gods were all butt punching each other. It says he stopped near the foot of the cracked steps leading up to the temple. That was what it was. He saw that now. A temple like in one of those Greek fairy tales that guys used to make up back when they weren't too busy butt punching each other. It's like, come on. Like even here, you have to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what we haven't mentioned either that I feel like you just have to remind me, the unrelenting horribleness of Norman, is that, of course, he's also a racist.
Yes.
Like,
he is all the things.
Oh, absolutely.
All the things.
Like all of King's villains, he is also like a terrible over-the-top racist.
Yeah, just like, man, you could have cut so many words from some of those screeds because it was literally just him for like half a page, like talking about how much he hates literally everyone who isn't a white man. Like,
Yep.
it's anyways, I think we've had our fill of pound cake, and we're gonna walk it off in a little place we call King's Dominion.
There's another world out there. I know there is.
Here in King's Dominion, we talk about the connections to other Stephen King books, and there's quite a few here. What was the first one you noticed, Mac?
Page 5. Rosie reading Misery's Journey.
That's
by
right.
Paul Sheldon.
And who else is reading a Paul
That's what
Sheldon
sets
book?
Norman off.
Yeah. Anna is also reading Misery's Lover, which is described as his most torrid book. So,
Ooh.
And then I had Norman digs his nails into his palms, which is just very funny to me. Does anyone
Channeling Harold.
Does anyone else know what other book Cynthia, the other woman at the shelter who Norman attacks, what other Stephen King book is she in?
Oh, she's in. Hold on, I know. Is it
I read
Regulators
this, but
or
I didn't know it.
Desperation?
She is in Desperation and Regulators because they have the same
right.
characters. Yeah, she's a major character in Desperation. He liked this one. I initially thought she was in Insomnia. I remembered her being in another book, but then when I
the two-toned hair.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what always stands out to me, the two-tone.
Yeah, and then when I read Insomnia, I was like, oh, she's not in it. And then I was like, did I just make that up in my head? And then when I was reading this, I'm like, oh, there she is. So yeah, she pops up a couple books later. And I remember quite liking her role in Desperation, but it's again, it's been a while since I've read it. What else did you guys notice?
Well, of course, the City of Lud we mentioned earlier, and Ka.
Yep. Yeah, there's multiple Ka references.
And then this might be room 237, but talking about a dust, like she's talking about. Oh, it's actually the description of the spider face, which the spider actually. Speaking of, that's I don't know if that's direct or 237, but it was a face. It was the face of a bat in which had been set the bright eyes of a rabid fox. It was the face of a supernaturally beautiful goddess seen in an illustration hidden within some old dusty book like a rare flower in a weedy vacant lot.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote that down too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I think that bridges the gap between Dominion and 237, but because it sort of exists in this, it's like, is it just an image or does it have a larger meaning? But I wrote that down as well, and then there's also another line that there's just a reference to all worlds, like what is that line here? It's like that strange voice, the one was not quite the voice of Practical Sensible said calmly, "This world, all worlds, and many bulls in each one. These myths hum with truth, Rosie. That's their power. Mm-hmm. That's why they survive," which is a very Dark Tower sentiment, I'd say. So,
yeah, I think also Dorcas claims that that her and Rose are well met, which is a big phrase in Midworld, and I had a couple of room 237s. If you'll indulge.
You were the king of 237, so I want to hear them.
There was a bunch in here, and I didn't grab a lot of them because they were at moments that I just thought, this is just so dismal. I just don't want to make light of any of this book. But there was one moment where in page 174 in the original press here, Norman's alter ego, as he registers with Whitestone, is Alvin Dodd. And I wonder if he chose Dodd, or if he was aware of Frank Dodd or whatever, you know. And then page 389, when Rose Matter's face turns in the mask of a cat or perhaps a fox, I thought, Sleepwalkers, anyone?
That's a classic Mac 237. We had a Susan Day sighting. Susan Day from Insomnia is a picture of her is hanging in Anna's office, which makes sense. And then this isn't quite necessarily King's Dominion. It's more like just, well, I guess if it encompasses all worlds, then I guess it is. But and Kathy Bates is called out for her reading of Silence of the Lambs, and I just thought that was funny because obviously Kathy Bates was, one of King's favorite people. I mean, she starred in Dolores Claiborne, and she also starred in Misery, that was interesting to me.
That's an interesting one because he specifically mentions Misery several times in the book.
Yep.
Yeah, I had that one too.
Yeah, that's such an easy King's Dominion is just throw in Paul Sheldon books around. Like I feel like he does that
exactly.
a lot.
I know, right?
And also, sadly, like she's mentioned as a character. Like it's not just he throws them in, but like there's a long discussion with Anna and Rosie about romance novels, specifically Misery, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Any others that you guys have?
Does anyone know if Kathy Bates actually read Silence of the Lambs? Because I would love to check that audiobook out if she did.
Yeah, right.
Let me look it up.
Dig it in.
Well, as I do that,
I wish there was some full dark, no stars, but sadly
there's a lot
there was no mention.
All dark.
Oh yeah, she definitely did do it.
Woo!
Yeah, so
nice.
That's one to get.
Oh, cool.
All right, that's next on my list.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to head into our final rankings or overall thoughts. I almost got this section right.
Dad, can we go now?
You ready?
Yeah, we've been ready for an hour.
Okay, I'll be right there.
You said that a half hour ago. Yeah, my dad's weird. He gets like that when he's writing.
Welcome to Final Rankings, a.k.a. Overall Thoughts. This is where we discuss our overall thoughts and give our final rankings. Mac, why don't you start us off? How many bright red Pennywise clown noses are you giving Rose Matter?
I didn't love it. I understand why it's at the bottom of a lot of people's lists. But I also understand why some people, really love it. Like Jen, I'm sure you're giving it more Pennywise noses than I am. But I'm going to be giving this 2 bright red Pennywise shiny bright red Pennywise clown noses, and then maybe like a thing of vinyl, the DJ's carting around, for the kids. I just, I really wanted to like it a lot more than I did. I do love all the Rosie stuff. I think you guys are right. I think it could have been 2 novels, but I'm like kind of also like, you guys can keep that other novel. Like I don't need to read more of this. But at the same time, I do feel like there's a couple of ideas in here, and I feel like one's a Bachman book. It's almost like he realized, oh yeah, let me write Regulators in Desperation. Like the way, like kind of figure it out with this. Like this could have been 2 things, but like that kind of mirrored each other. But yeah, I just didn't particularly love it. And I'm a sucker for like tied-in Dark Tower stuff. But like Randall was saying earlier, it is so shoehorned in here that and so odd. I didn't even I didn't even mention like we didn't actually really talk about the painting at all.
Well, the painting is really not like well defined necessarily.
But just that's what I'm saying. Like that's such a huge part of this thing, and we spent the last 3 hours and we didn't really talk about that sequence at all, or the fact that could have been a thinny, or like what the things that were more interesting in this book was everything that kind of gets lost along the way, and when they start focusing more on the supernatural element, which I just did not land for me. So yeah, I'm going to give it two bright Pennywise clown noses, and the DJ's hanging out.
How about you, Ana?
I did. You would ask me maybe halfway into the book. I think I probably would have been with 2, but I think I'm actually going to give it 3. It almost would be like maybe 3.5, because like I enjoyed reading this much more than I enjoyed Dolores Claiborne. And I felt like even though it was kind of a slog, or whether even I could tell it was a slog for him, like I was interested, and it was so weird. Yeah. There was a part of me that like kind of was like, what the fuck is he going to do now? How is he going to pull this off? Part of me was also, how is he going to pull this off? Which he didn't quite do. But I was interested. And I do think Rosie redeems a lot. It basically, like, she's responsible for, like, 3 of those noses. That sounds weird. But, I don't know if I reread King books all the time. I'm not sure if I'll reread this one. Yeah. But it'll stick with me. There are things from it that'll definitely stick with me.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I'm going to also give it, I'm going to give it 3, I don't know, I'm going to give it 3.5 bright red Pennywise clown noses. I enjoyed this book quite a bit. It's one, I feel similarly to Jenn in that I can recognize a lot of its faults, but I also found myself very, King protagonists are tough sometimes. I think especially a lot of his male protagonists are kind of boring, and the rest of the characters are a lot more interesting. And I think in this case, I really, really like Rosie as a protagonist. And I kind of, Norman obviously has tons and tons of problems, but I mean, if nothing else, like King really makes you hate him. And I enjoy that. Like I enjoy hating someone and then seeing them get eaten to death by a painting demon. So there's something sort of satisfying about that. And I will say that I enjoyed the Greek stuff a lot more this time around than I did the first time. I still don't think it quite works, but it gives the book a unique texture. And I think this is like a really strange book in King's oeuvre that is a fun discussion point, and I think it's a fun book for constant readers to kind of commingle around and be like, what do we make of this one? And I've noticed that when I was looking at some message boards and stuff, I think people have a lot of really conflicting and views of this book, and so I think a lot to struggle with, but overall I found it mostly compelling and a pretty, like, definitely more than Dolores Claiborne and even Insomnia, more of a compulsive read. I think I moved a lot quicker with this one than I did with those. And so 3.5 bright red Pennywise clown noses, although I will say I'm happy to move on from this era of King's writing. I think that it was I think it was an interesting period for him, and one that he maybe needed to do, and obviously it birthed some great stuff. I mean, there's a lot of good to be found in Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne and Insomnia and this book. But, I'm excited for the next phase because there's a lot of weirdness and a lot of darkness and a lot more like monsters. You know what I mean? And I'm excited for that. So, Jenn, how about you?
I've kind of struggled with what I was going to rank this for a while because there are parts that I would give a 5 and there are parts that I would give a 1. I feel like this is such an extreme book. I think I'm going to give it a 4 or 4 bright red Pennywise clown noses. A lot of that is emotional connection because I do recognize a lot of the flaws. And I think a lot, and I do think I am doing a lot of heavy lifting to get to those noses. And I think I probably would give it a 3.5 noses, except that, like, I'm just so glad that it exists that I think that bumps it up for me. I feel like this book kind of has found me in like kind of how the painting finds Rose. Like it was the book that I needed to read at the time, and then it was the book that I needed to read this month. And it just, as hard as it was to read, there are things that I just really loved and like allowed me to kind of unlock some things that I've been holding back. I've talked about this book in therapy, but I'm ready to leave this behind. I don't think I'm going to reread it. Although who knows, it might find me later on in my life. But yeah, as much as I love this section of King's writing, and maybe it's just because I've been talking about it and kind of really digging into it instead of just kind of letting it wash over me. I'm ready to move on. Although I am glad that this section of his work exists too, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to talk about these books that really kind of mean a lot to me. So
that's great. Well, as we wrap up, why don't we do some plugs? Mac, where else can we hear you?
Well, you can hear me over on Halloweenies. We are covering the Friday the 13th franchise, and we're heading to Manhattan next month, but we just covered New Blood this last month. If you want to join,
and you guys are also going to be at the Salem Horror Fest, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
You guys are. I think you guys are what? You're doing a Jason Lives reunion.
Yes, we are. I was blanking.
I love that
I was on this conversation, but
I'm not even on.
I was
podcast.
in this conversation, but there's we have the thread that's about 400 texts by the time I get to it sometimes, and I was clued in later on that we are in fact doing this, and it's going to be a Jason Lives reunion, and we're assembling some of those folks. I don't want to speak about who too soon, but. Yeah, it's gonna be real cool.
I hope you get Jason.
But yeah, if you want to hear more about horror franchises in general, in terms of film, definitely hop over to Halloweenies and join our Patreon because we're covering random films as well as doing some commentary.
Fun. Jen, how about you? Where else can we hear you?
You can find me on Psychoanalysis, a horror therapy podcast. We are in October. We're about to start our theme of PTSD. And our first episode is going to be on The Descent and how we see PTSD represented in that movie, which is one of my favorites.
That's a great movie. Yeah.
I love that movie.
Yeah,
it's so good. And then we are actually going to be at Salem Horror Fest as well. And we're going to be, we're going to be looking at Laurie Strode in Halloween H2O and Halloween, the new Blumhouse one, and just how the differing like representations of PTSD in those movies. And then we're not ready to quite announce this yet, but I think we're going to be visiting Woodsboro for our final chapter in PTSD and how like we see that with a certain survivor, Final Girl that I love. So,
cool.
Stay tuned for more info on that.
And Anna, where else can we hear you?
I don't have a podcast about horror unless, of course, you consider American politics. To be,
I think that counts.
So I have a podcast called With Friends Like These on the Crooked Media Network, and I will say it is the least connected to our day-to-day politics of the political podcasts over there. It's more about the politics of kind of everyday life. New season starts this week, and the theme of the season is good intentions. So we're going to be looking at white saviors and welfare programs that don't work out, and also some of like the science of good intentions, like the neuroscience of altruism, which is a really interesting field. No one knows. Like, there's a big philosophical and literal like medical debate about why people are altruistic. Like what purpose does it serve? Obviously, I'm excited. And then I also have a column that'll be running through the election at a website called Popula, which is sort of like a weird kind of little indie magazine. And it's an election diary. It's me kind of doing they used to call them blogs, I think. Kind of doing, a few times a week, some reactions to what's happening, which is, of course, a lot. And again, if you like horror, my most recent column was about how all these people seem to be wanting us to do the purge. Like actual
God, we're
incitement of civil war. It's really, it's terrifying. Sorry to bring us all down, but
wow.
wow.
Oh, no. Well, this has been a blast.
Everyone should register to vote.
Yes.
Go vote.
Yes, I agree with that.
Go to votesaveamerica.com.
Yes.
You can find instructions on registering to vote in your state and where early voting is available. There are people already voting. Go in person to vote if you can. The end.
Yes. I support all of that.
Yes.
And I also support you continuing to listen to the Losers Club and subscribing to our Patreon if you want. You can find us at patreon.com/thebarons. We've got tons of fresh content always there for you. But for now, it's time to sign off. Let's do a long days and pleasant
nights.
nights.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
Consequence Podcast Network.